Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Bridgewater, but everyone calls me Sam. I'm talking to you now because what happened in Moonshine Hollow back in 1987 needs telling. 21 years I worked as a forest ranger, and most folks don't know that half my job was hunting down illegal moonshine stills in the North Carolina mountains. I grew up in these hills. My daddy made shine, and his daddy before him. The Bridgewater family had been cooking corn liquor since before the Civil War, but I chose a different path. Put on a badge instead of tending copper pots. My family never forgave me for that choice. The Pisgah National Forest covers over 500,000 acres, and Moonshine Hollow sits right in the heart of it. 30 miles from the nearest town, with no roads going in. You have to hike 6 miles on trails that most maps don't show. The locals keep those paths secret for good reason. I'd shut down 67 illegal stills in my career. Knew every trick the mountain families used. How they hid their operations in caves, buried their copper coils in creek beds, used laurel thickets to block the smoke. I spoke their language, understood their ways. That's why the ATF called me when 3 of their agents went missing in the hollow. Never believed in harvest spirits, I told Agent Rodriguez when she briefed me that October morning. Figured the moonshiners just told ghost stories to keep federal agents away. Maria Rodriguez was young, maybe 30, with city shoes that would never make it up the mountain trails. "What exactly are harvest spirits supposed to be?" she asked. I poured coffee from my thermos and watched fog roll through the valleys below us. Old stories say that back in the 30s, some revenue agents disappeared while investigating stills. Locals claim spirits protect the traditional ways. Of course, I figure what really protected them was mountain justice and 12-gauge shotguns. The missing ATF agents had last radioed from Deep Creek, a hidden valley I knew well. 3 generations of the Hawkins family had run stills there. Their last transmission mentioned things made of corn and blood, which sounded like drunk talk to me. "We need someone who knows the territory," Rodriguez said. "Someone the locals might trust." I strapped on my gear, badge, radio, Colt Detective Special, and enough water for a 2-day hike. The autumn air smelled of wood smoke and rotting leaves. Perfect weather for cooking shine. The morning mist hung thick in the hollows, which meant the moonshiners would be busy. Steam from their operations would blend right in. We hiked single file up the ridge trail. Rodriguez brought 2 more agents, city boys who breathed hard after the first mile. I tried to teach them to read sign. Broken twigs, scuff marks on rocks, places where deer paths got redirected around human activity. "How do you know where to look?" asked Agent Thompson, a tall kid with soft hands. "Same places I'd put a still," I said. "Near water, but not too near. Hidden from above, but with escape routes. And always where your family's been doing it for generations." The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Usually these woods buzzed with insects, squirrels chattering, birds calling. But as we climbed toward Deep Creek, even the bugs went silent. The only sound was our boots on wet leaves and Rodriguez trying not to breathe too hard. "Something feels wrong," she whispered when we stopped for water. I felt it too, but I'd learned not to trust feelings over facts. 21 years of police work teaches you that weird feelings usually mean you're missing something obvious. Still, the silence bothered me. Animals know things before people do. We found the first still around noon. It sat in a clearing beside Deep Creek, copper coils gleaming in the filtered sunlight. But no people, no fresh tracks, no warm ashes in the fire pit. "Looks abandoned," Thompson said. I knelt by the mash barrels. Still warm. Someone was here this morning. The setup was perfect. Professional-grade copper pot, clean tubing, good water source. But something was off. The corn mash bubbled and fermented without any heat source I could see. The smell was too strong, too sweet. like overripe fruit mixed with something else, something that made my stomach turn. "Where is everyone?" Rodriguez asked. That's when I noticed the patterns. Corn husks arranged in perfect circles around the still. Not random debris. Deliberate designs that hurt to look at directly. And the ground itself felt wrong under my boots. Too soft. Too wet. Like it was soaked with something thicker than creek water. "We should radio for backup," I said. Rodriguez tried her radio. Static. I tried mine. Dead air. "Equipment failure," Thompson said. "Mountains interfere with signals." But I'd been using radios in these hills for 21 years. They'd never failed like this before. And the silence was getting worse. Even our voices seemed muffled, like the air itself was too thick to carry sound properly. That's when we found the first barrel. It sat apart from the others, and when Rodriguez lifted the lid, we saw moonshine clear as water. But it moved wrong, flowed uphill along the barrel's edge, formed little whirlpools that spun against gravity. "Impossible," Thompson whispered. I'd seen a lot of impossible things in my career. Usually they turned out to be simple once you understood the trick. But I couldn't figure the trick here. The liquid definitely flowed upward, defying every law of physics I knew. "We need to get out of here," I said. But when we turned to leave, the trail was gone. The path we'd followed for hours had vanished like it never existed. We stood in a clearing surrounded by thick laurel that blocked every direction. That's when the real fear started. The laurel thicket around us looked like a solid green wall. No gaps, no broken branches to mark where we'd entered. It was like the forest had closed behind us like a trap. "This isn't possible," Rodriguez said, but her voice shook. "We came from that direction." She pointed at laurel so thick you couldn't push a stick through it. Thompson pulled out his compass. The needle spun in wild circles, never settling on a direction. "Equipment's going crazy." I'd hunted these mountains since I was 12 years old. Never got lost. Never. But standing in that clearing, I couldn't tell north from south. The fog seemed to be getting thicker, even though the sun was still high. "Stay together," I said. "We'll find a way out." That's when we heard the bubbling. It came from the still, but louder now. Like a pot boiling over, except the sound echoed wrong. Too deep. Too hollow. Rodriguez moved toward the barrels with her gun drawn. "Don't touch anything," I warned. Too late. She'd already reached for the wooden ladle beside the main pot. The moment her fingers touched it, the bubbling stopped. Complete silence. Even our breathing seemed too loud. Then something moved in the biggest barrel. At first I thought it was just the liquid settling, but moonshine doesn't move like that. It rose up from the barrel in a column, twisting and turning like a snake made of clear water. About 3 feet tall, with a shape that almost looked like a person if you squinted. "Jesus Christ," Thompson whispered. The liquid figure turned toward his voice. It had no face, but somehow I knew it was looking at us, studying us. The smell of fermented corn got stronger, mixed with something else, something rotten. Rodriguez raised her gun. "Federal agents, identify yourself." The thing made a sound like wet cloth being wrung out. Then it started moving toward us, flowing across the ground like spilled water, but keeping that twisted human shape. "Run!" I shouted. We scattered. I crashed, head through the laurel, branches tearing at my clothes. Behind me I heard Rodriguez screaming. Not fear. Pain. Real pain. I turned back and saw the liquid thing wrapped around her legs. Like living rope. Wherever it touched, her skin went pale. She was trying to kick free, but the creature just flowed higher up her body. Thompson fired his gun. The bullets passed right through the thing without slowing it down. Rodriguez's screams got weaker. The color was draining from her face like someone pulling the plug on a bathtub. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a broken tree branch, and swung it at the creature. My branch passed through empty air, but Rodriguez collapsed, her skin gray as old paper. The liquid thing flowed back toward the barrel, leaving Rodriguez crumpled on the ground. When I checked her pulse, her skin felt cold and rubbery, like touching a balloon. Her eyes stared at nothing. "Is she dead?" Thompson asked. I rolled her over and nearly threw up. Her back was covered with small holes like something had been drinking from her, but no blood, just empty spaces where something should have been. "We have to get out of here," I said. But the laurel was still there, still solid. And now we could hear more sounds from the other barrels. Bubbling, splashing. Like things were waking up. Thompson was crying. "This isn't real. This can't be real." I'd seen plenty of scared rookies over the years. Fear makes people stupid, and stupid gets you killed. But looking at Rodriguez's empty eyes, I was scared too. 21 years of law enforcement, and I'd never seen anything like this. "Listen to me," I told Thompson. "Whatever these things are, they're real. Rodriguez is dead. We need to focus on staying alive." More liquid shapes were rising from the barrels now, different sizes, but all with that same twisted human form. They moved like they were testing their bodies, learning how to use them. I remembered what the old-timers used to say about harvest spirits. They came from the corn mash itself, born from fermentation and old blood. I'd always figured it was nonsense, but nonsense doesn't kill federal agents. The largest shape, maybe 6 feet tall, turned toward us. This one was different, more solid, more human-looking. When it opened what might have been a mouth, I heard a voice like liquid being poured. "Revenuers," it said. "Always coming. Always dying." That voice. I knew that voice. "Granddaddy," I whispered. The thing tilted its head. "Little Sammy, chose the wrong side, didn't you?" My grandfather had died in 1933, shot by revenue agents while defending his still. I was raised on stories of Ezra Bridgewater, the best moonshine cook in 3 counties. But this wasn't him. This was something wearing his voice like a mask. "You're not real," I said. The creature laughed, and the sound was like water running down a drain. "Real as the corn, real as the blood, real as the choice you made to betray your own kin." It flowed toward us, moving faster now. Thompson emptied his gun at it, but the bullets just made splash sounds. The other shapes started moving too, surrounding us. I felt something cold touch my ankle. One of the smaller creatures had reached me. Where it touched, my leg went numb. I could feel it starting to drink. That's when I remembered what Granddaddy used to say about fighting fire with fire, and what kills moonshine faster than anything. I pulled out my cigarette lighter. "Thompson, your matches. Light anything that'll burn." The liquid thing on my ankle hissed and pulled back from the flame. They didn't like fire. That made sense. High-proof alcohol burns fast and hot. I grabbed a handful of dry leaves and lit them. The creatures moved back, making that wet cloth sound. But there were too many of them, and my little fire wouldn't last long. "The still," I shouted. "If we can destroy the source." But even as I said it, I knew we were in trouble. The shapes were getting more solid meats, or human-looking, and I was starting to understand what had happened to those missing ATF agents. They hadn't just died here, they'd become part of it. The creatures didn't like my little fire, but they didn't fear it either. They just moved back and waited, like they had all the time in the world. Thompson was hyperventilating, his hands shaking too bad to work his matches. "Breathe slow," I told him. "Fear will kill you faster than they will." But that wasn't true. Looking at Rodriguez's empty face, I knew these things killed plenty fast when they wanted to. The one wearing my grandfather's voice drifted closer to the edge of my firelight. "Put that away, Sammy. You'll only make it worse for yourself." "What do you want?" I asked. Same thing we always wanted. To be left alone. To make our shine in peace. Its voice got harder. "But you government boys never could do that, could you?" I kept the burning leaves high, but they were turning to ash in my hands. "You're killing innocent people." "Innocent?" The creature laughed. "Ain't nothing innocent about men who destroy a family's livelihood, about boys who turn their backs on their blood." Thompson finally got a match lit and started a small fire with some dried bark. The creatures pulled back another few feet, but I could see more shapes forming in the barrels behind them. We were buying time, not winning. "My granddaddy was a good man," I said. "You're not him. Your granddaddy died protecting what his father built, and his father before him. Died because revenue agents like your friends here came to destroy our way of life. The creature's face was getting clearer, more human. It looked like the old photographs I'd seen of Ezra Bridgewater, but wrong. Like someone had drawn him from memory in liquid. That was 50 years ago, I said. Time don't mean much when you're made of corn and rain and the blood of murdered kinfolk. It gestured to the other shapes. Every one of us died protecting these hills from your kind. That's when I understood. These weren't just random spirits. They were every me, moonshiner who'd died fighting federal agents. Every mountain man who'd been shot, beaten, or imprisoned for making corn liquor. All of them, somehow pulled back and given new form. Thompson's fire was getting bigger, and the creatures had backed off to maybe 20 feet. But I could see others moving in the trees beyond the clearing. We weren't fighting just the ones from the barrels. We were fighting generations of the dead. How many of you are there? I asked. Enough, the granddaddy thing said, and growing. Every time you government boys come up here, we get stronger. A new shape emerged from the tree line. This one still looked human, mostly. It wore ATF gear and had Rodriguez's face, but its eyes were empty holes and moonshine dripped from its mouth. Maria? Thompson whispered. The Rodriguez thing tilted its head. Still warm, it said in her voice. Still got some life left to give. Thompson screamed and ran toward the trees. 3 shapes flowed after him like hunting dogs. I heard him crashing through the laurel, then a wet sound, then silence. Your friend's going to make fine shine, the granddaddy thing said. Sweet blood, city soft. Won't take long to cook him down. My fire was dying. The creatures were moving closer, and I was starting to feel something strange in my head. A pulling sensation, like being drunk but wrong. You're trying to get inside my mind, I said. Course we are. Easier that way. Less fighting. The thing's voice was getting more like my real grandfather's. Just let go, Sammy. Join the family business like you should have years ago. I could feel it working, my thoughts getting fuzzy. The creatures didn't look so scary anymore. The moonshine smell was starting to seem pleasant instead of sickening. But then I thought about Rodriguez, about her empty eyes and the holes in her back, about Thompson's screams cutting off too quick, about the 3 missing ATF agents who were probably wandering around here somewhere, turned into moonshine monsters. I lit my last handful of leaves and backed toward the still. If I could damage their source, maybe I could hurt them. Maybe I could get out alive and warn people. Don't make us take you the hard way, the granddaddy thing said. You already took me the hard way, I said, 21 years ago when I put on this badge. I threw my burning leaves at the nearest barrel. The flames spread across the surface of the moonshine like gasoline. The creatures shrieked, not like voices, but like steam escaping from a pot. The burning barrel tipped over, spilling flaming alcohol across the ground. Where it touched, the liquid shapes dissolved. But there were so many more. I grabbed a piece of burning wood and ran to the next barrel. The creatures were trying to stop me, but they couldn't get close to the flames. For a moment I thought I might actually make it. Then something cold wrapped around my ankle. I looked down and saw a small shape, maybe the size of a child. It looked like Thompson, but made of clear liquid. It smiled with his face and said, "Help me, Sam. They're trying to cook me." The Thompson thing was just a distraction. While I stared at it, something else grabbed my wrist. The Rodriguez shape, still wearing her badge, still looking mostly human, except for the moonshine leaking from her empty eye sockets. "Time to join the family," she said in Maria's voice. I felt the cold spreading up my arm. My vision started to blur. The world was turning soft and liquid around the edges. I was becoming like them. But I still had the burning stick in my other hand. I jammed it right into the Rodriguez thing's chest. It screamed and let go, flowing backward like spilled water. But more creatures were coming. Too many to fight with just fire. That's when I saw him. A real person, not made of liquid. An old mountain man with a long gray beard standing at the edge of the clearing. He wore overalls and carried a shotgun that looked older than me. Why? "I'll Bridgewater's boy," he called. "Yes," I shouted back. "Then you best remember who you really are." He fired his shotgun at the nearest barrel. But instead of regular shells, what came out was pure flame, like a flamethrower made from moonshine and gunpowder. The creatures screamed and flowed away from the fire. The old man reloaded and fired again, this time at the copper still itself. The whole thing went up like a bomb. "Name's Billy Hawkins," he said, walking into the clearing. "Been hunting these things for 30 years. "I thought you were dead," I said. Billy Hawkins was supposed to be the informant who'd called in about the illegal stills. "I am dead," he said. "Died 3 days ago. They got me, same as they got your friends. But I ain't ready to become one of them just yet." Looking at him closer, I could see he was right. His skin was pale as moonlight, and moonshine dripped from the corners of his mouth. But his eyes were still human, still fighting. "How long do you have?" I asked. "Not long, but maybe long enough to get you out of here." He fired his shotgun again, clearing a path through the creatures. "You remember the old stories your granddaddy told about the harvest spirits?" "Some." "Then you know how to stop them. Permanently." The creatures were regrouping, flowing back toward us. The granddaddy thing looked angry now, less human, and more like living alcohol. "What do I have to do?" I asked. Billy smiled, but moonshine ran from between his teeth. "Same thing your granddaddy should have done 50 years ago. Make a choice between family and what's right." That's when I understood what he meant, and why the creatures had been so interested in me specifically. This wasn't just about stopping illegal moonshine operations. It was about ending something that should never have started, something that had been growing in these mountains for generations, fed by blood and corn and the anger of the dead. But to stop it, I was going to have to do something that went against everything I'd believed about myself for 21 years. I was going to have to become a moonshiner again. Billy Hawkins handed me a mason jar filled with clear liquid. But this moonshine was different. It glowed with a soft blue light, and when I held it, I could feel warmth spreading through my fingers. "What is this?" I asked. "Same corn mash they use," Billy said, reloading his shotgun. "But made with different intentions, made to heal instead of hurt." The creatures were forming a circle around us, moving slower now. They seemed confused by Billy's glowing moonshine. The granddaddy thing tilted its liquid head like it was trying to understand. "That shine's made wrong," it said. "Ain't got the proper blood in it." "That's right," Billy said. "Made it myself, 3 days ago, right after they killed me. Took everything I knew about cooking shine and did it backward." Billy was fading. I could see through him now, like looking at someone through water. The moonshine dripping from his mouth was coming faster. "Listen close," he whispered. "Your granddaddy started this mess in 1933. Mixed his own blood with the mash when the revenue agents shot him. Died cursing the government, cursing anyone who'd betray the mountain ways. That curse has been growing ever since, feeding on every drop of blood spilled in these hills." The creatures were getting restless. More shapes were emerging from the forest. I could see Thompson among them now, his face pale and empty, and 3 men in ATF gear who must have been the missing agents. "How do I stop it?" I asked. "Got to choose," Billy said. "You can keep being a government man, keep fighting them with fire and bullets. Maybe you'll win, maybe you won't. But they'll just come back stronger. Or you can remember who you really are. Make moonshine the way your family always did, but do it right this time. Do it to heal instead of harm." The granddaddy thing was moving closer. "Boy's got Bridgewater blood in him. He belongs with us." "No," I said. "I chose my path 21 years ago." But even as I said it, I knew Billy was right. I'd been fighting my own nature for decades, fighting the part of me that understood corn and copper and the old ways, fighting the part that knew making good shine was as much art as science. "Your choice," Billy said, "but choose fast. I can't hold them much longer." He fired his shotgun again, but this time only regular flame came out. His special ammunition was gone, and so was most of him. I could barely see his outline now. The creatures rushed forward. I opened Billy's mason jar and took a drink. The liquid burned like regular moonshine, but it burned clean, like drinking sunlight instead of poison. And suddenly I could see things differently. The creatures weren't just made of corn mash and blood, they were made of pain. Generations of mountain people who'd died defending their way of life, who'd been twisted by anger and loss into something monstrous, including my grandfather. "Granddaddy," I said to the thing wearing his face, "you were a good man, but this ain't you anymore." "I'm what they made me," it said. "What you helped make me by choosing their side over your own blood." "No," I said. "You're what hate made you. What happens when good people get so angry they forget how to be good?" I pulled out the other thing Billy had given me, a copper coil, small enough to hold in one hand. It was warm to the touch and seemed to hum with its own energy. "This is from the first still your granddaddy ever made," Billy whispered, almost gone now. "Before the blood, before the anger, when he just wanted to make something good from corn and water and time." The creatures stopped moving. They were staring at the copper coil like it hurt them to look at. "Where did you get this?" I asked Billy's fading ghost. "Been carrying it for 30 years. Your granddaddy gave it to me the night before he died. Said if things went bad, if the government came for him, I should make sure someone in the family knew how to make proper shine that built people up instead of tearing them down." I understood now. I'd spent 21 years fighting against everything my family stood for. But they'd never stood for making monsters. They'd stood for taking simple corn and turning it into something that brought people together, that warmed them on cold nights, that celebrated life instead of death. The creatures were backing away from the copper coil, but they couldn't seem to leave. Something was holding them here. "The curse," I said. "How do I break it?" Billy smiled, and for a moment he looked solid again. "Same way it was made, with blood and intention. But this time, choose love instead of hate." I bit my thumb until it bled, then let the blood drop onto the copper coil. It hissed like water on hot metal. "I choose to remember what my family really taught me," I said out loud. "Not the anger, not the hate, the skill, the tradition, the care." The coil grew brighter. The creatures made sounds like steam escaping. "I choose to make moonshine that heals instead of hurts, that brings people together instead of driving them apart." The granddaddy thing was changing, becoming less solid. "Sammy, is that you?" For a moment, his voice sounded right. Sounded like the grandfather I remembered from old stories, not the twisted thing that had been hunting me. "Yes, sir," I said. "It's me. I'm sorry, boy. So sorry. The anger it got so big. Bigger than love. Bigger than family. Bigger than everything good I ever tried to be." The other creatures were changing too. Becoming more human, more themselves. I could see Thompson looking confused, like he was waking up from a bad dream. The ATF agents seemed to be remembering who they were. "Can you forgive me?" my grandfather asked. "Already have," I said. "Can you forgive me?" He smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the photograph. "There's nothing to forgive, Sammy. You chose your own path. That's what a man's supposed to do." The copper coil was glowing so bright now I could barely look at it. The clearing filled with warm light, and one by one the creatures began to fade. Not dissolving like before, but fading like people walking away into sunlight. "Thank you," my grandfather said as he disappeared. "Thank you for remembering." When the light faded, I was alone in the clearing. The stills were gone. The barrels were gone. Even the strange cornhusk patterns had vanished. But Rodriguez was still dead. Thompson was still dead. The 3 missing agents were still dead. Some things, even magic moonshine can't fix. Billy Hawkins appeared one last time as I gathered the bodies of my colleagues. He was almost transparent now, more memory than ghost. "It's done," he said. "The curse is broken, but the dead stay dead." "I know," I said. "Will they come back? The harvest spirits?" "Not like they were. The anger's gone out of them." But the mountains will always have their secrets, always have their guardians. He smiled. Maybe kinder ones now. It took me 2 days to hike out of the hollow with the bodies. When I radioed for help from the ridge, I told them we'd been ambushed by moonshiners defending their operation. Told them Rodriguez and Thompson and the others had died in a firefight, that the criminals had escaped deeper into the mountains. No one questioned my story. Dead federal agents needed explanations that made sense in reports and courtrooms. Truth about harvest spirits and family curses wouldn't help anybody. I retired from the Forest Service 6 months later. Bought a small cabin in the foothills, as far from Moonshine Hollow as I could get while staying in North Carolina. But I didn't forget what Billy had taught me. I built a small still in my basement. Nothing fancy, just copper tubing upstairs, and corn mash and patience. I make 2 jars a month, no more. Give them to neighbors when they're sick, to friends when they're celebrating, to strangers when they look like they need something to warm them. It's good moonshine, clean and smooth and healing. Sometimes people ask where I learned to cook shine so well. I tell them it's a family recipe. Every morning when I make coffee, I add just a drop of my moonshine to the cup. Just 1 drop. It tastes like sunshine and corn silk and forgiveness. Sometimes when the morning mist rolls through the valleys, I think I can see shapes moving in the fog. Not threatening, not angry, just watching. Making sure the mountains and the people in them are safe. Last month, a young ATF agent came to my door. She wanted to know about the incident in Moonshine Hollow. Said they were reopening the investigation, looking for new leads. Nothing new to find, I told her. Those moonshiners are long gone. But the operation, she said. There's no way they could have just vanished. Equipment like that doesn't disappear. I poured her a cup of coffee with just a tiny drop of my homemade shine. She drank it without knowing what it was. Mountains are strange places, I said. Things don't always work the way they do in the city. Sometimes the best thing a federal agent can do is know when to let sleeping dogs lie. She left after that, looking thoughtful. I watched her drive away and wondered if she'd ever find her way to Moonshine Hollow, wondered what she'd find there if she did. Because Billy was right about the mountains having guardians, and I think I know who the new ones are. Last week I hiked back to Deep Creek for the first time since 1987. Found the clearing where everything happened. It's peaceful now, green and quiet and normal, but there's a small spring there that wasn't there before. The water tastes like the sweetest moonshine you ever had, but it doesn't make you drunk. It makes you remember what's important. Family, tradition. The difference between building something good and letting anger turn it into poison. I filled a jar from that spring and brought it home. Keep it on my kitchen table next to the family photos. Sometimes I drink from it when I'm feeling lost or angry or too much like a government man instead of a mountain boy. It helps me remember who I really am. Samuel Bridgewater, son of moonshiners, keeper of old ways made new, guardian of secrets that keep the mountains safe. My name is Samuel Bridgewater, and I'm telling you this story for a reason. Because someday, some young federal agent is going to go looking for trouble in places where trouble has deep roots and long memories. When that happens, I hope they remember that some traditions are worth preserving, that some families have been making peace with these mountains for longer than the government has existed, and that sometimes the best way to enforce the law is to understand why people break it in the first place. The harvest spirits are gone, but the harvest continues, and I'm still here, making sure it's done right. Every morning, 1 drop at a time. My name is Margaret Stonefield, and I used to be a fire lookout ranger. Badge number 22847. 12 years I spent watching those mountains, and I thought I'd seen everything they could throw at a person. I was wrong. Back in 1978, I was the only woman working the fire towers in Jefferson National Forest. Took me 3 years just to get the job. The men didn't think I belonged up there, alone with the wind and the weather. Maybe they were right. Maybe some places aren't meant for people at all. I picked Widow's Peak because nobody else wanted it. The tower sat at 4,100 feet, perched on a granite spike that cut into the sky like a broken bone. Getting supplies up there meant a 6-mile hike through rough country. The Cherokee used to avoid this place, called it hungry ground. The old settlers who tried to hunt here during the 1800s, well, some winters they didn't come back down. But I liked the quiet. After Daniel died in Vietnam, I needed somewhere the world couldn't reach me. The peak gave me that. Just me, my radio, and miles of empty forest stretching in every direction. I had my routine down perfect. Every morning at 6, I'd climb the metal stairs to the observation deck and check my equipment. The Osborne firefinder helped me spot smoke and calculate distances. Weather readings went out twice a day. I knew every ridge and valley for 60 miles in any direction. The work suited me. Fires were simple enemies. You could see them coming, track their movement, call in the crews to stop them. Clean problems with clean solutions. I'd prevented 847 fires in 12 years. I was good at my job. The hunters started coming up in late October. Small groups mostly, chasing deer and bear before winter set in. They'd wave when they passed the tower, sometimes stop to ask about weather conditions. Nice enough folks, just looking for meat to fill their freezers. Then November H. It hard that year. The Weather Service called it a freak storm system, but up on the peak, it felt like something else. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in one night. Snow came down thick and fast, earlier than anyone expected. By November 15th, I was completely cut off. That's when the radio calls started coming in. Fire Tower 7, this is Sheriff Hawkins. You got 4 hunters up your way who didn't come home last night. Party led by Jake Morrison, supposed to be back by sunset yesterday. I knew Jake. Big man, friendly smile, been hunting these mountains for 20 years. He wouldn't get lost, and he sure wouldn't leave his truck parked at the trailhead if something hadn't gone wrong. Copy, Sheriff. Weather's been brutal up here. You want me to take a look? Appreciate it, Margaret. Their camp should be about 2 miles north of your position, near the old lightning-struck oak. I knew the spot. Sheltered depression, good water source, the kind of place smart hunters would pick. I loaded my pack with emergency supplies and headed out into the snow. The forest felt wrong from the moment I left the tower. Too quiet. No bird sounds, no squirrel chatter, nothing. Just the crunch of my boots and the whisper of snow falling through bare branches. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. I found their camp after an hour of hard walking. The tents were still standing, but something made the hair on my neck stand up. The snow around the camp was all churned up, stained dark in patches. Looked like a fight had happened. Inside the largest tent, I found the first sign of real trouble. Sleeping bags torn open, camping gear scattered everywhere, and bones. Clean white bones with marks on them I didn't want to think about too hard. But it was the pot over their dead fire that really got to me. Still had meat in it. And the way it was arranged, like someone had been. And very careful about the cooking, like they'd done it before. I radioed back to the sheriff, trying to keep my voice steady. Found their camp, no sign of the hunters, but, Sheriff, I think you better send up a team, and maybe call the state police too. That bad? I looked at those bones again, noticed how they'd been cracked open, how the marrow had been scraped out. Yeah, that bad. The wind picked up as I hiked back to the tower, making sounds that almost seemed like voices. Whispering things I couldn't quite make out. The temperature was dropping fast, and my water bottle started getting slushy, even inside my jacket. Back at the tower, I tried to eat some of my emergency rations, opened a can of beef stew, heated it up on my camp stove. But when I went to eat it, something was wrong. The meat looked spoiled, greenish around the edges. Smelled like it had been sitting in the heat for days. That was impossible. I'd checked the expiration date that morning. Can wasn't even dented. I tried a different can. Same thing. Then another. All of them bad. Every single one. 12 cans of food. All gone rotten in the space of a few hours. Night fell like a hammer. The temperature hit 15 below, colder than I'd ever seen it on the peak. My breath froze in the air, and ice started forming on the inside of the windows. And that's when I heard the voices in the wind. Soft at first, like people talking far away. But as the night went on, they got clearer, closer, They were talking about food, about how hungry they were, about how long it had been since they'd had a proper meal. I told myself it was just the wind through the trees, mountain acoustics playing tricks. But deep down, I knew better. Something was very wrong on Widow's Peak, and I was trapped up there with it. The second call came in just after dawn. Fire Tower 7, we got another problem. Sheriff Hawkins sounded tired, like he hadn't slept. Got a second hunting party that went radio silent yesterday afternoon, Tom Bradley's group. 4 men, good hunters, all local boys. My stomach dropped. They had 2 groups, 8 men total, all missing in the space of 2 days. Sheriff, maybe you shouldn't send anyone else up here until... Already got Deputy Hartwell heading your way with a search team. Should reach you by noon. Tom Hartwell. Good man. Steady as they come. I'd worked with him before on lost hiker calls. If anyone could handle whatever was happening up here, it was Tom. But something told me this was bigger than lost hunters. I spent the morning trying to make sense of what I'd found at Jake Morrison's camp. The bones bothered me most. They were too clean, scraped too carefully. And the way they'd been arranged around that cooking pot, it looked almost ceremonial. The Cherokee stories came back to me. The old ones about wendigos, creatures that were once human but got twisted by hunger and cold, turned into something that could never be satisfied, no matter how much it ate. I'd always figured those were just stories to keep people from starving to death in bad winters, warnings about what desperate people might do to survive. Maybe I'd figured wrong. Around 11, I spotted movement on the trail. Tom Hartwell and 3 other men working their way up through the snow. I felt a little better seeing them. 4 armed men, all experienced woodsmen. Whatever was happening up here, they could handle it. I met them at the base of the tower. Tom looked grim, older than his 40 years. The cold had gotten to all of them. Their faces were red and raw, ice forming in their beards. "Bad business up here, Margaret," Tom said, shaking snow off his boots. "Found Bradley's camp about a mile down the trail, same mess as the Morrison group. Bodies? Parts of them." He looked sick. Whatever got them, it wasn't a bear. Bears don't arrange things. One of the other men, Jerry Mullins, spoke up. He was young, maybe 25, new to the force. "Never seen any of this thing like it. Looked like they turned on each other, like they went crazy all at once." "Cabin fever," said the third man, an older deputy named Frank Collins. "Happens sometimes. People get trapped in the cold, they start thinking strange things." But Tom shook his head. This was different. The tracks in the snow, they were hunting each other, like predators. I led them up into the tower, got the camp stove going to make some coffee. The warmth felt good, and the men started to relax a little. We spread out my maps, marked where both camps had been found. "So we got 8 missing hunters," Tom said, studying the map. "All experienced men, all well-equipped. And we got evidence they turned on each other in both cases." "What about animal attacks?" Jerry suggested. "Mountain lion, maybe? Could drive people to panic." Frank laughed, but it didn't sound happy. "Mountain lion didn't cook anybody in a pot, son." That's when I noticed something wrong. I'd put out food for the men, crackers, some canned meat, coffee, standard search and rescue stuff. But none of them were eating. They kept looking at the food, then looking away real quick. "You men hungry?" I asked. Tom rubbed his stomach. "Starving, actually. Haven't eaten since yesterday, but that stuff..." He gestured at the crackers. "Doesn't look right somehow." I picked up a cracker, examined it closely. Looked fine to me. But when I brought it close to my nose, I caught a whiff of something rotten. Something dead. Jerry tried to drink his coffee, made a face, and put the cup down hard. "Tastes like it's got blood in it." "Mine too," Frank said. "What kind of water are you using up here, Margaret?" I'd been drinking the same water for 3 days. Tasted fine to me, but I watched these 4 grown men stare at perfectly good food like it was poison, and something cold crawled up my spine. "Maybe we should head back down," I said. "Get you men to a doctor, make sure you're not coming down with something." Tom started to answer, but then his radio crackled to life. "Dispatch calling with an emergency. All units. TS, we got a distress call from the mountains. Hunting party of 6 requesting immediate assistance. They're..." They're saying their group is attacking each other. Coordinates putting them about 3 miles northeast of Fire Tower 7. 6 more hunters. Third group in 3 days. Tom keyed his radio. This is Deputy Hartwell. We're on scene at the tower. Can you patch us through? Static filled the air for a long moment. Then a voice came through, rough and desperate. Help us. God, please help us. They're eating... Johnson's eating Miller's arm, and he's still alive, and he won't stop, and... The transmission cut to static. We all looked at each other. Frank's face had gone white. Jerry was shaking, and not from the cold. Tom keyed the radio again. Unit calling for assistance. Please respond. What is your exact location? More static. Then... The hunger. Oh God, the hunger won't stop. It hurts so much. I can smell them cooking, and it smells so good, and I want... Silence. Tom tried calling back, but got nothing. The radio frequency had gone dead. We need to get down there, he said, standing up. Those men need help. But I grabbed his arm. Tom, think about this. 3 hunting parties in 3 days. All the same story. All the same symptoms. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we're not dealing with crazy hunters. Maybe we're dealing with something that makes people crazy. Frank snorted. Like what? Some kind of disease? Like something hungry, I said. Something that's been up here a long time, waiting for the right conditions. That's when we heard the first howl. It came from somewhere down the mountain, echoing off the rocks and trees. But it wasn't any animal I'd ever heard. It sounded almost human, but wrong, like someone screaming and laughing at the same time. Jerry went to the window, pressed his face against the glass. There's something moving down there. Multiple contacts, coming up the trail. I joined him at the window. Through the swirling snow, I could see dark shapes moving between the trees. They moved wrong, too fast and too fluid, and there were too many of them. Tom, I said quietly, we need to get out of here, right now. But when I turned around, Tom was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. His eyes were different somehow, hungrier. Margaret, he said in a voice that didn't quite sound like his own. You've been up here all alone for so long. You must be so... tender. I backed away from Tom, my hand moving to the pistol on my hip. But Frank and Jerry were between me and the stairs, and they had that same look in their eyes. That hungry, predatory stare. Easy, Margaret, Frank said, licking his lips. We're not going to hurt you. Much. Outside, the howling got closer. More voices joining in, creating a chorus that made my teeth ache. Through the window, I could see the shapes moving up the mountain. They looked like people, but they moved like wolves. Tom took a step toward me. Do you know how long it's been since we ate? Really ate? The hunger is so strong up here. It gets into your bones, makes you think about things you never thought about before. Tom, you ate 6 hours ago, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You had lunch before you came up here. He laughed, and the sound was wrong, too sharp, too wet. Did I? I can't remember. All I can remember is the smell, the beautiful smell of cooking meat. Jerry was sniffing the air like a dog. She's been alone up here for days, he said. All that isolation, all that marinating. I pulled my gun, aimed it at Tom. Stop it. Whatever's happening to you, fight it. Oh, Margaret. Frank shook his head sadly. You don't understand. We're not fighting anything. We're finally free. Free to satisfy the hunger that's been eating at us our whole lives. The howling outside reached a crescendo, then suddenly stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. Tom cocked his head, listening. They're here, he said. Aid. The others. The ones who found what we're looking for. Heavy footsteps on the metal stairs. The tower shook as multiple people climbed toward us. But something was wrong with the footsteps. They were too heavy, too irregular, like whatever was climbing wasn't quite human anymore. I kept the gun trained on Tom while backing toward the radio equipment. If I could get a message out, warn people away from the mountain, Tom, please. You're a good man. You have a wife, kids. Think about them. I am thinking about them, he said. Thinking about how sweet they'd taste. How their bones would crack between my teeth. The footsteps reached the observation deck. The door handle turned slowly. I fired a shot into the ceiling. Stay back! I'm armed! The door opened anyway. What walked through wasn't human anymore, though it had been once. It might have been Jake Morrison, or one of Bradley's men. Hard to tell. The cold and hunger had changed it into something else. Something tall and gaunt, with skin stretched too tight over sharp bones. Its eyes were yellow, like a wolf's, and its mouth was full of teeth that looked like they'd been filed to points. "Hello, Ranger," it said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "We've been so hungry, so very, very hungry." Behind it came others, 6 or 7 shapes that had once been men, now twisted into something between human and beast. They filled the small space of the observation deck, pressing close with their terrible, hungry eyes. Tom and his men stood perfectly still, waiting, like they were in church. "The hunger calls to the hunger," the Jake thing said. "Your men understand now. They've heard the song of the empty belly, felt the pain of the unfed soul." "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "To feed," it said simply. "We've been feeding for so long. First the Cherokee hunters, then the settler. Now you're modern sportsmen. Each winter, when the snow traps people on the mountain, we feast. We grow stronger." One of the other creatures, it might have been Tom Bradley, stepped forward. "But you're different, Ranger woman. You've been alone up here for months, breathing the hungry air, drinking the starving water. You're almost ready to join us." "I'll never—" "You already have," the Jake thing said. "When did you last eat? Really eat? Not just nibble at spoiled rations, but actually satisfy your hunger?" I tried to remember. Days ago? A week? The memories were fuzzy, confused. I'd been surviving on coffee and crackers, but even those had tasted wrong lately. "The mountain changes people," it continued. "Makes them understand what real hunger is. Not the simple need for food, but the deeper hunger. The hunger for warmth, for companionship, for the taste of life itself." I could feel something changing inside me. A gnawing emptiness that went deeper than my stomach, deeper than anything I'd ever felt. The gun felt heavy in my hands. "That's it," Tom said softly. "Feel the hunger, Margaret. Let it fill you up." But then I saw something that snapped me back to reality. On the Jake thing's jacket, I could make out a name tag. Morrison. But underneath it, in smaller letters, was something else. Vietnam vet, 1st Infantry. Just like Daniel's unit. Just like my dead husband. "Daniel," I whispered. The Jake thing tilted its head. "Yes, we know your pain, Ranger woman. The hunger of loss, the hunger of grief. We can fill that emptiness. We can make you whole." "You're not Daniel," I said, raising the gun again. "And you're not Jake Morrison. You're just hungry ghosts wearing dead men's faces." The Jake thing smiled, showing those pointed teeth. "Maybe, but we're also the only company you'll find up here." That's when I realized the truth. I was surrounded. The creatures blocked the door. Tom and his men blocked the stairs, and outside, the howling had started again. They were calling to others, summoning more of their kind. I was trapped 70 feet, yet up in a fire tower with nowhere to run, and not enough bullets for all of them. "Choose quickly," the Jake thing said. "Join us willingly, and the transformation will be easier. Fight us, and we'll make you one of us anyway. But it will hurt so much more." I thought about Daniel, about the life we'd planned to have together, about the children we'd never had, the home we'd never built, about all the hungry, empty years since he'd died. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was better than being alone. Then I smelled smoke. The smell was faint at first, barely noticeable under the stench of death and hunger that filled the observation deck. But I'd spent 12 years watching for fires. I knew that smell better than my own name. Something was burning down the mountain. Something big. The creatures noticed it too. The Jake thing's yellow eyes widened and it let out a sound somewhere between a hiss and a whine. "Fire," it said. "There's fire on the mountain." I remembered what my grandmother used to say about wendigos back when I was little, and she'd tell Cherokee stories on winter nights. "Fire kills the hunger," she'd whisper. "Burns it clean away, sends the spirits back to the empty places where they belong." I'd thought they were just stories. The smoke smell got stronger. Through the windows, I could see an orange glow rising from the valley below. The wind was picking up, pushing the fire uphill toward the tower. The creatures started getting agitated. They moved away from the windows, pressing together in the center of the room. Their confident hunger was replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "We need to leave," Tom said, but his voice sounded more like himself now. The hungry look in his eyes was fading. "Margaret, we need to get out of here." "The fire won't reach us up here," Frank added, and I could hear confusion in his voice, like he was waking up from a bad dream. "Will it?" But I was thinking about the propane tanks I kept for heating and cooking, about the radio equipment with its old electrical wiring, about 12 years of accumulated supplies and materials, about the emergency flares in my equipment locker. The Jake thing read my expression and snarled. "Don't even think about it, Ranger woman. Fire may hurt us, but we'll take you with us." "Maybe," I said, backing toward the equipment locker. "But you know what? I've been alone on this mountain for months, and I just realized something. I'm not hungry anymore." That was true. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, my stomach felt full. Not with food, but with purpose. With the knowledge of what I had to do. I yanked open the locker and grabbed a handful of emergency flares. Military surplus, the kind that burn at 2,000 degrees for 15 minutes. Hot enough to melt steel. "Fire purifies," I said, pulling the first flare's ignition cord. "Burns away the hunger, leaves only what's real." The flare burst to life with a brilliant red light. The creatures screamed and pressed back against the far wall. Even Tom and his men cringed away from the intense heat. I could see them changing, the unnatural hunger leaving their faces. Jerry collapsed to his knees, looking around in confusion. Frank grabbed his head like he was fighting a terrible headache. But the Jake thing and the other fully transformed creatures weren't giving up that easily. They rushed toward me, claws extended, teeth bared. I threw the flare at the nearest one. It hit the creature in the chest and stuck there, burning through its jacket and into the dried-out flesh underneath. The thing shrieked and went up like a torch, filling the small space with the smell of burning meat. "The propane!" I yelled to Tom, who seemed to be himself again. "Get everyone downstairs now!" He understood immediately. Started pushing Frank and Jerry toward the stairs, half carrying them as they stumbled and moaned. The fire down the mountain was getting closer, and the wind was turning into a howl. I lit 2 more flares and threw them at the remaining creatures. They dodged, but the flares hit my equipment and supplies, setting everything ablaze. The observation deck filled with smoke and heat. The Jake thing made one last, desperate charge at me. Its claws raked across my arm, tearing through my jacket and into the skin underneath. But the touch burned it too, and it pulled back with a cry of pain. "This isn't over," it hissed. "The mountain will always be hungry. Always waiting." "Maybe," I said, lighting my last flare. "But not today." I threw it into the pile of burning equipment and ran for the stairs. The explosion came just as I reached the ground level. The propane tanks went up with a roar that shook the entire tower. Fire erupted from the observation deck, sending burning debris in all directions. Through the smoke and flames, I could hear the creatures screaming. Not the hungry howls from before, but sounds of genuine pain and fear. The sounds of things that knew they were dying. Tom and his men were waiting at the base of the tower, supporting each other as they stumbled away from the flames. They looked sick and confused, like people waking up from a fever dream. "What happened to us?" Jerry asked. "I remember coming up here, but then it's all fuzzy." "Food poisoning," I said quickly. "Bad water. Happens sometimes in the mountains. It wasn't true, but it was better than the truth. Some things people aren't meant to understand. The fire from the valley had reached the base of the peak now, driven by the wind into a full-scale forest fire. We had to move fast, or we'd be trapped. As we headed down the trail, I looked back once at the tower. It was completely engulfed now, a pillar of flame against the dark sky. Inside that fire, I knew the last of the hunger spirits were burning away. But the Jake thing's final words echoed in my head. The me. Mountain will always be hungry. I hoped it was wrong. I was afraid it was right. They gave me a medal for heroism, said I'd saved 4 men's lives during a freak forest fire, showed exceptional courage in the face of danger. The newspapers called me a hero. If they only knew. The official report blamed everything on a combination of factors: early blizzard conditions, contaminated food supplies, altitude sickness, and mass hysteria. The missing hunters were listed as victims of the fire, their remains never recovered. Clean and simple, the way bureaucracy likes it. Tom and his men recovered fully, though none of them remembered much about what happened on the peak. Sometimes I'd catch one of them looking at me strangely, like they were trying to remember something important. But the memories never came back, and eventually they stopped trying. I transferred to a different forest, took a desk job processing fire reports. Couldn't handle the isolation anymore. Couldn't trust myself alone with the wind and the trees. Every time I heard the forest go quiet, every time my food started tasting wrong, I'd pack up and head back to town. Some hungers, once you've felt them, never really go away. The fire burned for 3 days before they got it under control. Took out nearly 5,000 acres, including the entire Widow's Peak area. They rebuilt the tower the next year, installed modern equipment, better safety systems. But they had trouble keeping rangers up there. People would last a few weeks, then request transfers. Claimed the place felt wrong somehow. Eventually, they just automated the whole system. Cameras and sensors instead of human eyes. Safer that way, they said. I kept track of the missing persons reports from that area. Every few years, especially during hard winters, hunters would disappear. Never as many as that November in '78, but enough to notice if you were looking for patterns. The new rangers would file their reports, blame it on exposure or bear attacks. They'd mark the cases closed and move on. But I knew better. The hunger was still up, there, waiting. 20 years later, I got a call from a young ranger named Sarah Collins. She'd been assigned to patrol the Widow's Peak area, and she had questions about the old tower, about what had really happened that winter. "I've been reading the files," she said. "There are things that don't add up, things that don't make sense." "Some things aren't supposed to make sense," I told her. "Some things are just dangerous. But if there's something people should know..." "There is," I said. "Stay away from Widow's Peak during the winter. Don't camp alone. And if your food starts tasting wrong, if the forest goes too quiet, get out immediately." That's not very scientific advice. "Science doesn't explain everything," I said. "Sometimes the old stories are true. Sometimes the monsters are real." She thanked me and hung up. I never heard from her again. But a month later, I saw a small news item buried in the back pages of the local paper. Young Forest Service employee missing in the Widow's Peak area. Last seen heading up the old fire tower trail during an early season blizzard. They found her truck at the trailhead, found her equipment scattered in the snow, but they never found her. I thought about calling someone, sharing what I knew. But who would believe me? And what good would it do? The mountain was hungry again, and it had found someone to feed on. That's the thing about wendigos, about hunger spirits, about the old evils that sleep in wild places. You can't really kill them. You can drive them back, make them weak, force them to hide for a while. But they're always there, waiting for the right conditions. Waiting for someone to get lost and desperate and alone. Waiting for winter to come again. So if you're ever up in those mountains, and you hear voices in the wind talking about food, about how long it's been since they've had a proper meal, if your supper lies start spoiling for no reason, if the animals all disappear, if the forest goes dead quiet, don't try to be a hero. Don't try to understand what's happening. Just run and pray the hunger doesn't follow you home. My name is Margaret Stonefield, former Fire Lookout Ranger, badge number 2847. I've seen 847 fires in my career, helped fight most of them, saved thousands of acres of forest. But some fires aren't meant to be fought. Some fires are meant to burn, to cleanse, to hold back things that are worse than any wildfire. I keep matches in every room of my house now, emergency flares in my car. When the nights get long and cold, when I hear sounds outside that might be wind but might be something else, I light candles and remember the heat that drove the hunger away. Fire purifies. Fire protects. And sometimes, fire is the only thing standing between us and the dark, hungry places where monsters wait to feed. The mountain remembers. The hunger endures. But fire is eternal. My name is Franklin Pierce Holloway, and I've spent the last 19 years pulling people out of caves they had no business being in. I'm retired now, living in a little house outside Corbin, Kentucky, but some stories stick with you like limestone dust in your lungs. This one's been eating at me for 30 years. Back in 1965, I was a ranger with the Daniel Boone National Forest, specializing in cave rescue operations. Folks called me Frank, and I had a reputation for getting people out of tight spots underground. Funny thing is, I was scared of small spaces myself, a leftover gift from my time as a tunnel rat in Korea. But I learned early that sometimes you face your fears to help others face theirs. Copperhead Gorge was my territory. 600 mapped passages snaking through the limestone hills like a giant's root system. The deepest we'd charted went down 400 feet. But every spelunker worth his carbide lamp knew there was more down there. The Cherokee had stories about those caves, stories about warriors who went in and never came out. White settlers heard the tales and mostly stayed away. But by my time, college kids thought they knew better than old Indian warnings. That spring of '65 was a wet one. Rain came down in sheets for 2 weeks straight, turning the underground river into a rushing monster that could sweep a man away before he knew what hit him. Smart cavers stayed home. Unfortunately, the University of Kentucky Spelunking Club wasn't feeling particularly smart that April. I got the call on a Tuesday morning. 7 college students had gone into the Copperhead system the day before. Only one came out, and he was babbling about things that crawled wrong. Sheriff Briggs found the kid wandering Highway 27 in his underwear, hypothermic and talking nonsense about creatures in the walls. "Frank," Sheriff Briggs told me over the phone, "this bee, always talking crazy, says something grabbed his friends right through solid rock. You know how cave gas can mess with a person's head." I knew. I'd seen cavers hallucinate from bad air, seen hypothermia make people think they were being chased by monsters. But something in Briggs's voice told me this felt different. The survivor was Tommy Kessler, a junior studying geology. I found him in the hospital, wrapped in blankets and staring at the wall like it might come alive. His hands shook when he tried to drink water. "Mr. Holloway," he said when I introduced myself, "you have to seal that cave. You have to blow it shut. Son, 6 of your friends are still down there. We're going to get them out." Tommy grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "No, sir, they're not down there anymore. They're in the walls now. The crawlers took them into the stone." I'd heard stranger things from shocked cavers, so I patted his shoulder and promised we'd find his friends. That was my first mistake. The cave entrance sat 3 miles off the main road, down a logging trail that barely deserved the name. Old-growth pines crowded around the opening like they were trying to hide it. The mouth of the cave was about 6 feet high and 10 feet wide, big enough for easy entry, which made it popular with amateur cavers. I'd been in Copperhead Gorge dozens of times over the years. It was a beautiful system, full of flowstone formations and underground pools that reflected your carbide flame like mirrors. The main passage ran straight back for about 200 yards before branching into smaller tunnels. Most were easy crawls, nothing that should challenge experienced cavers. But standing there that Tuesday afternoon, something felt wrong. The air coming out of the cave was too warm, and it carried a smell I couldn't place, like wet stone mixed with something organic, something dead. My partner, too. That day was Deputy Ray Clark, a part-time cave rescue volunteer who'd been underground with me a dozen times. Ray was good people, steady hands, calm head, never panicked in tight spots. He noticed the smell, too. "Dead bat colony, you think?" he asked, checking his gear. "Maybe." I tested my carbide lamp, making sure the flame burned bright and clean. But bats don't usually die off this time of year. We entered the cave at 2:30 in the afternoon, following standard protocol. Test the air, check for loose rock, establish radio contact with the surface team every 15 minutes. The main passage looked normal. Limestone walls carved smooth by centuries of water flow, ceiling high enough to walk upright without ducking. But the acoustics were wrong. Our voices echoed strangely, like the sound was bouncing off spaces that shouldn't exist. And our carbide flames, which should have burned steady in the still cave air, kept flickering like something was moving just out of sight. We found the first sign of the missing cavers about 300 yards in. Tommy Kessler's backpack sitting neatly against the wall like someone had placed it there carefully, too carefully. Inside were his spare carbide, some candy bars, and a note that made my blood run cold. "If anyone finds this, don't follow the scratching sounds. They want you to follow. TK." Ray read over my shoulder. "What scratching sounds?" That's when we heard it. A soft scraping noise coming from somewhere to our left, except there was solid limestone wall to our left. The sound was coming from inside the rock. I've been underground enough to know that caves play tricks with sound. Echo chambers can make a dropped pebble sound like thunder. Air moving through cracks can whistle like a scream. But this scratching noise was different. It had rhythm, purpose, like something was trying to claw its way out, or in. "Could be roots," Ray said, but his voice had that careful tone people use when they're trying to convince themselves of something. "Tree roots growing through the limestone." "Tree roots did Tom say." "On scratch, Ray." We followed the main passage deeper, looking for any sign of the missing students. The cave branched off into smaller tunnels, and we marked each one with chalk, standard practice to avoid getting turned around. But as we worked, that scratching sound followed us. Always from inside solid rock, always just out of sight. 200 yards farther in, we found something that stopped us cold. 5 backpacks arranged in a perfect circle on the cave floor, their contents spread out in neat patterns around them. Rope coiled in spirals. Carbide lamps placed at exact intervals. Food arranged by size and type. "No way cave-in survivors did this," Ray whispered. I knelt beside the nearest backpack. It belonged to Sarah Beth Coleman, according to the university ID inside. Her emergency contact was listed as her mother in Louisville. I was going to have to call that woman and tell her, what? That her daughter had vanished into solid rock? The scratching sound grew louder, and now it was coming from multiple directions, above us, below us, from the walls on both sides. Ray grabbed my shoulder. "Frank, look at the ceiling." I pointed my carbide flame upward and felt my stomach drop. Claw marks scored the limestone in long, parallel grooves. But limestone is hard rock. It would take metal tools and considerable force to cut marks that deep. These looked fresh, like whatever made them had passed through recently. "Cave bear?" Ray suggested weakly. "Cave bears have been extinct for 10,000 years, Ray, and they can't walk on ceilings." That's when we heard the scream. It came from deeper in the cave system, echoing through passages we hadn't explored yet. A young woman's voice, high and terrified, calling for help. Sarah Beth Coleman, maybe, or one of the other missing girls. We moved fast, following the sound through a narrow squeeze passage that opened into, a large chamber. Our lights revealed flowstone formations like frozen waterfalls and pools of still water that reflected our flames. Beautiful, if you could ignore the scratching sounds that seemed to come from every direction now. The scream came again, closer this time, from a passage to our right. We hurried toward it, but something made me stop. The sound was wrong somehow. Too clear, too perfect, like an echo of an echo. "Ray, wait." But he was already moving toward the sound, rope and rescue gear ready. That's when I saw the wall beside him start to ripple, like the solid limestone was turning into water. A pale hand emerged from the rock, fingers ending in claws that scraped stone like butter. Then an arm, reaching for Ray's shoulder. I shouted a warning and tackled him aside just as those claws swept through the air where his head had been. We hit the cave floor hard, our lights spinning and casting crazy shadows on the walls. When I looked up, the hand was gone, but I could see movement in the stone itself. Dark shapes swimming through solid rock like fish through water. "What the hell was that?" Ray gasped. Before I could answer, the screaming started again, but now it was all around us. Multiple voices coming from inside the walls, inside the floor, inside the ceiling above our heads. The missing students, calling for help from somewhere we couldn't reach. And mixed with the screams was something else. A sound like dozens of claws scratching against stone, getting louder by the second. Ray scrambled for his radio. "Base, this is Rescue Team 1. We need immediate backup," and the radio crackled with static. "Base, do you copy?" Nothing but white noise. We were on our own. The scratching sounds were getting closer, and now I could see why. The walls around us were full of movement, shapes flowing through the limestone like it was thick liquid. Dozens of them, maybe more, circling us in 3 dimensions. "The main passage," I said. "We need to get back to the entrance." But when we turned around, a figure stepped out of the solid rock wall behind us. Tall, impossibly thin, with skin like wet stone and eyes that reflected our carbide flames. It moved wrong, joints bending in directions that shouldn't be possible. More emerged from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. 6, 7, 8 of them, surrounding us in the chamber. Up close, I could see they weren't quite human. Their arms were too long. Their fingers ended in claws that looked like broken stone, and when they moved, they made no sound at all. One of them opened its mouth, and Sarah Beth Coleman's scream came out. That's when I understood. These things, whatever they were, they'd taken the missing students, absorbed them somehow, and now they were using their voices to lure more prey. Ray raised his flashlight like a weapon, and the nearest creature hissed and stepped back. The bright beam seemed to hurt it, making its stone-like skin smoke where the light touched. "The lights," I said. "They don't like bright light." But carbide lamps only burn so long, and flashlight batteries don't last forever. I could see our situation clearly now. We were trapped 400 feet underground with creatures that could move through solid rock, and our only weapons were a couple of lights and whatever cave rescue gear we carried. The creatures began to move closer, and I noticed something else. When they solidified enough to step out of the walls, they left holes behind, gaps in the limestone that shouldn't exist. Through those holes, I could see into chambers beyond, and in those chambers, pale shapes were hanging from the walls like cocoons. The missing students. Still alive, maybe, but trapped in stone webbing that pulsed like a heartbeat. One of the creatures reached for Ray, and I swung my carbide lamp at it. The flame passed right through its arm, but where the light touched, the creature screamed and its form wavered like smoke. We had a chance. Maybe. But first, we had to get out of this chamber alive. The creatures moved like water given shape, flowing around us in patterns that made no sense. One moment they were solid enough to touch. The next, they'd melt back into the stone walls like they were never there. But their eyes never left us. Pale, reflective things that tracked our every movement. Ray kept his flashlight trained on the nearest one while I tried to think. 19 years of cave rescue had taught me to stay calm in impossible situations, but this was beyond impossible. This was nightmare made real. "Frank," Ray whispered, "how do we fight something that can move through solid rock?" "We don't fight," I said. "We run." But when I looked toward the passage we'd come from, another creature was rising out of the floor, blocking our escape route. Its mouth opened and Tommy Kessler's voice came out. "Help me, please help me." That's when I noticed the water. The underground river that ran through this part of the cave system. I could hear it flowing somewhere nearby. And I remembered something from the Cherokee stories Sheriff Briggs had mentioned once. Running water was sacred, a barrier that spirits couldn't cross. "Ray, do you hear that water?" He tilted his head, listening past the scratching sounds and the false screams. Yeah, sounds like it's coming from that passage there. He pointed with his light toward a narrow opening I'd missed before. Follow me. Keep your light on them. We backed toward the sound of running water, Ray sweeping his flashlight beam across the creatures. They hissed and wavered when the light hit them, but they didn't retreat far. They were learning, adapting, getting braver. The passage led down at a steep angle, and I could smell the river now. Wet stone and moving water and the clean scent of underground springs. Behind us, the creatures were following, their claws scraping against stone as they flowed through the walls around the narrow tunnel. We emerged into a cavern I'd never seen before, though I'd been mapping these caves for years. And ground river ran through the center of it, maybe 10 feet wide and flowing fast with spring runoff. The water was black in our lights, but it sounded clean and strong. More importantly, when the first creature tried to follow us out of the passage, it stopped at the edge of the water. Its pale form wavered and hissed, but it wouldn't cross the stream. The water, I said. They can't cross running water. Ray sagged with relief. So we just stay here until backup arrives? That's when I realized our radio silence probably meant no backup was coming. We were listed as overdue, sure, but cave rescues took time to organize. By the time anyone came looking for us, these things might have found another way around the water, and the missing students were still trapped somewhere in the rock. We can't just wait, I said. Those kids are still alive, Ray. I saw them in those chambers. Frank, those things will kill us if we try to go back. He was probably right. But I'd spent 19 years getting people out of caves, and I wasn't about to stop now, even if it killed me. I studied the cavern, looking for another way forward. The river flowed out through a low tunnel that looked too small for a man, but upstream it came from a larger passage. If I could follow it back to its source, maybe I could find another route to the chambers where the creatures were keeping their prisoners. That's when the ceiling above us started to crack. Dust rained down, and I heard the deep grinding sound of stone under stress. The creatures might not be able to cross the water directly, but they were still up there in the rock, and they were doing something to weaken the cave structure. They're trying to bring the ceiling down on us, I said. A chunk of limestone the size of a basketball crashed into the stream beside us, sending up a spray of cold water. More cracks appeared, spreading like spider webs across the cavern roof. We had maybe minutes before the whole thing came down. Upstream, I said. Move. We waded into the river, and the cold water hit me like a slap. Spring. Runoff in Kentucky caves is always cold, but this felt like ice. The current was stronger than it looked, and the bottom was slick with centuries of smooth stone. Behind us, the cavern ceiling collapsed with a roar that echoed through the entire cave system. Tons of limestone crashed into the space where we'd been standing, blocking the passage completely. But we were alive, and the creatures couldn't follow us through the water. The river led us through a series of chambers I'd never seen before, each one carved from the limestone by thousands of years of flowing water. Some were barely big enough to crawl through. Others opened into cathedral spaces that swallowed our lights. And in every one, I saw signs of the creatures. Claw marks in the walls, smooth holes where they'd passed through solid rock. And something else, a pattern to the marks, like they were territorial markers or some kind of language carved in stone. Frank, Ray said as we squeezed through a particularly narrow section, look at this. He was pointing at the wall beside us, where someone had scratched words into the limestone with a knife or sharp stone. SBC. Day 3. They keep us in the stone. Can't get out. If you find this, tell Mom I love her. Sarah Beth Coleman. She'd been alive 3 days ago, trapped, but still fighting. Still human enough to leave a message. We're close, I said. That's when we heard it. Human voices, weak but real, calling from somewhere ahead. Not the false screams the creatures had been using to lure us, but genuine human voices. Scared, tired, but alive. The river led us to a chamber unlike anything I'd ever seen. The walls were honeycombed with holes, each one perfectly round and about the size of a person. And in those holes, wrapped in some kind of pale, web-like substance, were the missing students. All 6 of them, still alive but barely conscious, held nest in cocoons that pulsed with their heartbeats. Sarah Beth Coleman was the closest, her eyes wide and terrified when our lights hit her. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. "Please, get us out." But that's when I realized we weren't alone in the chamber. The creatures were there too, dozens of them, flowing through the walls like living stone, and they'd been waiting for us. One of them, larger than the others, stepped out of the wall beside Sarah Beth's cocoon. When it spoke, it used her voice. "You cannot take them. They are ours now." It raised one clawed hand toward Ray, and I saw his flashlight begin to dim. Somehow the creatures were draining our lights, our only protection. In seconds, we'd be in total darkness with things that could move through solid rock. And that's when I heard the explosion. The blast came from somewhere above us, a deep rumble that shook dust from the cavern ceiling. Then another, closer this time. Someone was using dynamite on the cave system. "Back up," Ray said, but I shook my head. No backup team uses explosives in a rescue operation. Too dangerous. That's when I understood. The creatures weren't just keeping the students as food or prisoners. They were changing them somehow, turning them into something else. And someone outside knew it. Someone was trying to seal the cave system permanently, with all of us inside. The larger creature, the one that seemed to be their leader, hissed and flowed back into the wall. The others followed, disappearing into the stone like they'd never been there. But I knew they weren't gone. They were repositioning, getting ready for something. "Ray, we need to get these kids out now." I waded to Sarah Beth's cocoon and started cutting at the web-like material with my knife. It was tough, like spider silk, but thicker, and it stank of decay and something else, something that smelled like whetstone. Sarah Beth's eyes focused on me as I cut her free. "Mr. Holloway, you came back for us." "I told you I would, honey. Can you move?" She nodded weakly, and I helped her down from the wall hole. She was cold, too cold, and her skin had a grayish tint that reminded me of the creatures. Another explosion, much closer this time. Whoever was setting off those charges was working their way deeper into the cave system. I moved to the next cocoon, a boy I didn't recognize, maybe 19 or 20. As I cut him free, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "They've been changing us," he whispered. "Every day, a little more. Look." He held up his hand, and I saw that his fingernails had grown long and sharp, almost like claws. And when he moved, I could see through him for just a moment, like he was becoming transparent. "How long have you been here?" 5 days, maybe 6. It's hard to tell. They take us into the stone to feed, then bring us back. Each time, we become more like them. I looked at Sarah Beth and saw the same changes starting. Her eyes reflected our lights like mirrors, and when she breathed, it made no sound. They weren't just prisoners. They were being transformed into creatures like the ones hunting us. Another explosion, and this one brought down part of the ceiling. Rock crashed into the chamber, and I realized that whoever was setting off those charges was going to bring the whole cave system down on our heads. "We need to move," I said. "Now." But that's when the creatures returned, flowing out of every wall at once. Dozens of them, surrounding us completely. And leading them was the big one, the leader. But now it looked different, more solid, more real. "You understand now," it said in Sarah Beth's voice. "We are not invaders. We are what humans become when they stay in the deep places long enough. We are evolution." It gestured to the students I was trying to free. "They will join us willingly soon. The change is almost complete." Ray swung his dimming flashlight at the nearest creature, but the beam was getting weak. Our lights were failing, and once they died completely, we'd be helpless. That's when Sarah Beth spoke, and her voice was different now, deeper, with harmonics that seemed to come from the stone itself. "They're not wrong," she said. "It doesn't hurt anymore. The stone is warm, safe, We can move through it like water. We can live forever in the deep places. I looked at her and saw that her transformation was accelerating. Her skin was turning the color of wet limestone, and her eyes were becoming pale and reflective. Fight it, Sarah Beth. You're human. Don't let them change you. But she was already flowing backward toward the wall, becoming translucent. It's too late, Mr. Holloway. For all of us. Another explosion, the biggest yet, and cracks appeared in the cavern walls. Water began seeping through. The underground river was being diverted by the blasts. The creatures hissed and retreated from the spreading water, but they didn't go far. They were waiting, watching, and I realized they were herding us toward something. Ray, the water. They're afraid of running water, but not still water. We need to reach the river. But the chamber was filling with rubble from the explosions above, and our path to the stream was blocked. We were trapped with creatures that were becoming more solid and aggressive as our lights failed. The largest creature stepped forward, and now it looked almost human. Almost. Join us willingly, it said, and the change will be gentle. Fight, and we will drag you into the stone screaming. That's when I remembered something from my army days in Korea. Sometimes, when you're outnumbered and outgunned, the only option is to bring everything down around you and hope you survive the crash. I pulled out my emergency flares, the ones every cave rescue specialist carries for marking locations. Magnesium flares that burn at 3,000 degrees. Ray, when I light these, run for the water. Don't look back. Frank, what are you doing? What I should have done the first time someone told me to seal this place. I struck the first flare, and brilliant white light filled the chamber. The creatures screamed and flowed backward, their forms wavering like smoke in a hurricane. The magnesium light hurt them worse than our flashlights ever had. I threw the burning flare at the creature leader, and where it hit, stone flesh sizzled and cracked. The thing let out a sound like breaking rocks and melted back into the wall. Go! Now! Ray grabbed 2 of the less transformed students and headed for the water. I lit another flare and used it to drive back the creatures as I helped the others. But Sarah Beth was too far gone. She was already flowing into the stone, her human form dissolving. I'm sorry, I called to her, but she was beyond hearing now. The last explosion was the biggest of all, and it brought down the entire chamber ceiling. I dove into the underground river just as tons of limestone crashed into the space where we'd been standing. The current swept us away, through passages flooded by the blasts, toward whatever exit we could find. Above us, the cave system was collapsing, sealing the creatures in their stone prison. At least I hoped it was sealing them in. We made it out through a sinkhole 2 miles from the main entrance, carried by floodwater that deposited us in a farmer's pasture like pieces of driftwood. Ray had managed to save 2 of the students, both boys who'd been captured more recently and hadn't changed as much as the others. Sarah Beth Coleman and 3 of her friends never made it out. The official report listed them as victims of a cave-in caused by unstable geology and spring flooding. Their families were told it was a tragic accident. The person setting off those explosives was never identified. The State Geological Survey claimed they hadn't authorized any blasting in the area, and no mining permits were on file. Whoever it was, they'd used enough dynamite to collapse most of the known passages in the Copperhead Gorge system. The cave entrance was sealed with concrete and steel, marked with warnings about unstable rock formations. It's been closed to the public ever since. The 2 students we saved, Bobby Martinez and James Chen, recovered from their physical injuries, but they never talked about what happened down there. Bobby transferred to a school in California and became an engineer. James dropped out entirely and moved to Alaska, as far from limestone caves as he could get. Tommy Kessler, the original survivor, spent 6 months in a psychiatric hospital. When he got out, he wrote me a letter thanking me for trying to save his friends. He also included a warning. Check your basement, Mr. Holloway. Check the walls. I thought he was still dealing with trauma until I heard the scratching. It started about 3 months after the rescue. Soft sounds coming from inside the walls of my house, always at night, always when I was trying to sleep. I told myself it was mice or settling wood, but I knew better. The sounds were coming from the limestone foundation of my house. limestone that had been quarried from the same geological formation as Copperhead Gorge. I've lived with those sounds for 30 years now. Some nights they're just whispers in the walls. Other nights I can hear voices. Sarah Beth Coleman calling my name, asking why I left her behind. The other missing students pleading for rescue that will never come. And sometimes, on the worst nights, I see movement in the stone, shadows passing through the basement walls like fish through water. I've had the house blessed by 3 different ministers and a Cherokee medicine man. I've sealed cracks with holy water and salt and iron filings. Nothing stops the sounds. Because I understand now what those creatures really were. They weren't invaders or monsters from some other world. They were what happened when people stayed too long in the deep places, when the line between human and stone began to blur. The Cherokee were right to seal those caves 300 years ago. Some doors should never be opened. But I opened one anyway, and now I live with the consequences. Every night, I hear scratching in the walls. Every night, I remember the friends I couldn't save. And every morning, when I look in the mirror, my reflection seems a little more transparent than the day before. The change is slow, but it's coming. After 30 years of listening to those sounds, breathing limestone dust, living on top of stone that remembers what happened in the deep places, I'm becoming something else, something that belongs in the darkness between the rocks. I've written this all down because someone needs to know the truth about Copperhead Gorge. Not the official version, but what really happened down there in 1965. If you ever find yourself near a limestone cave that's been sealed with concrete and warnings, don't be curious. Don't wonder what's on the other side. Some things are meant to stay buried. And if you ever hear scratching sounds coming from inside your walls, don't ignore them. Don't tell yourself it's just old wood settling. Because 30 years after Copperhead Gorge, I can tell you with certainty, the crawlers are patient, and they never stop trying to come home. The stone remembers everything, and eventually it calls us all back to the deep places where we belong. My name is Bill McKenzie, and I was a forest ranger for 14 years before I learned that some mothers never stop looking for their children. I worked the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, specializing in search and rescue. Families would come camping with their kids, and sometimes those kids would wander off. That's where I came in. In my 14 years, I'd brought home 89 families safely. I was good at my job because I understood how scared parents think and how lost children behave. I had 3 kids of my own back then. Sarah was 8, Tommy was 6, and little Beth had just turned 4. Every time I helped a lost family, I thought about my own children and how I'd feel if they went missing. Maybe that's what made me so good at finding them. Rattlesnake Hollow was the worst part of my territory. The trails twisted through thick woods and ended at hidden cliffs. The Cherokee people had stories about the place. Something about a mother who lost her children long ago. But I never paid much attention to old stories. I figured missing hikers just took wrong turns and fell into the many hidden drop-offs. The hollow got its name from all the rattlesnakes, but I always thought the real danger was the terrain. Deep valleys, sudden cliffs, and trails that seemed to go one way, but actually led somewhere else entirely. The thick rhododendron bushes created natural mazes that could confuse even experienced hikers. It was late August 1959 when things started going wrong. The weather had been strange, hot and sticky during the day, then sudden thunderstorms that would roll through without warning. The humidity made everything feel heavy, like the air itself was waiting for something bad to happen. I remember that first call clearly. It came through on my radio around noon on a Tuesday. A family named the Morrisons had been camping near the hollow for 2 days. They had twin boys, age 7, and they were calling to report something strange. "Ranger McKenzie," Mrs. Morrison said when I got to their campsite. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. "We keep hearing a woman crying in the woods. She's calling children's names, but not our children's names." Her husband nodded. "Started last night around midnight. She was calling for Mary and Joseph and Little Fox. Those aren't our boys' names." I looked at their twin sons, Danny and David. They were quiet, which wasn't normal for 7-year-old boys. They kept looking toward the tree line like they were listening for something. Sometimes voices carry funny in these mountains, I told the family. Could be another camper calling their kids. Sound bounces off the rock walls and can seem to come from anywhere. But even as I said it, I felt uneasy. In 14 years, I'd never had a family report hearing a woman crying for children with such specific, old-fashioned names. The strange thing, Mr. Morrison continued, is that both our boys had the same dream last night. They dreamed about a sad lady who wanted to show them something special in the woods. I knelt down to talk to Danny and David. "What did this lady look like in your dream?" Danny whispered. "She was crying. She had long black hair and her dress was all torn up. She said she knew a secret place where children could play forever and never get hurt." David nodded. "She seemed nice but really sad, like she lost something important." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I'd dealt with enough lost children to know that predators sometimes use the promise of secret places to lure kids away. But this felt different. The boys seemed genuinely confused, not scared in the way children get when a real person tries to trick them. I spent the rest of that day checking the area around their campsite. Found normal things: raccoon tracks, some old beer cans from previous campers, a few trails made by deer. But I also found something that bothered me. About 50 yards from the Morrison campsite, near the edge where the ground dropped away into the hollow, I found a small circle made of stones. Inside the circle were 3 items: a wooden doll carved in the Cherokee style, a child's leather moccasin, and a piece of faded blue cloth. The items looked old, really old, like they'd been sitting there for decades, but they were arranged too neatly to have been there long. Someone had placed them there recently, but the objects themselves belonged to a different time. I didn't tell the Morrisons about what I found. Instead, I suggested they might want to move to a campsite closer to the main road. They packed up and left that afternoon, but not before Mrs. Morrison pulled me aside. "Ranger Mackenzie," she said quietly, "I know you think we're being silly, but I'm a mother and I know the sound of another mother crying. That woman in the woods, she's lost her children, and I think she's looking for replacements." That night, I went home to my own family. We lived in a small house about 20 miles from the forest. My wife Carol was making dinner while our 3 kids played in the living room. Everything was normal and safe and real. But when I tucked Sarah into bed, she asked me a question that made my blood run cold. "Daddy, who is the crying lady?" "What crying lady, sweetheart?" "The one who was in my dream last night. She knew my name, and she knew Tommy's name, and she knew Beth's name too. She wanted us to come play with her in the dark woods." The next morning I drove back to Rattlesnake Hollow before dawn. I needed to check that stone circle again and see if anything had changed. The circle was still there, but now there were more items inside it. A second wooden doll, a small pair of worn leather shoes, and what looked like a child's drawing made on birch bark. The drawing showed stick figures of children holding hands with a tall woman figure. At the bottom, in a child's careful letters, someone had written, "Mama found us." My hands shook as I photographed the items. In 14 years of forest work, I'd never seen anything like this. The objects looked like they came from different time periods. Some seemed like they might be from the 1800s, others from the 1920s or 1940s. But all of them had been placed there recently. I was so focused on the circle that I almost missed the sound. It started low and distant, like wind through the trees. But then it became clearer. Someone was crying. It was definitely a woman, and the crying had a desperate quality that made my chest tighten. It was the kind of crying a mother does when she's lost everything that matters. I'd heard it before from families whose children I couldn't find in time. The sound seemed to come from deeper in the hollow, down where the trails got dangerous. I followed it, marking my path carefully so I wouldn't get lost. As I walked, the crying got louder, but it also started moving. Sometimes it seemed to come from my left, sometimes from my right. Sometimes it sounded like it was right behind me. After about an hour of following the sound, I realized it was leading me in a circle. I'd passed the same fallen log 3 times. The crying woman, whoever she was was making me walk the same path over and over. That's when I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Sarah, Tommy, little Beth. The voice was calling my children's names. My children, who were safe at home 20 miles away. The voice knew their names, and it was calling them with the same desperate love I'd heard in the crying. Sarah, sweetheart, come to Mama. Tommy, don't be scared. Beth, my little baby. I pulled out my service radio to call for backup, but all I got was static. That was strange. My radio worked fine everywhere else in the forest. But in the hollow, it just made crackling noise. I started walking back toward my truck, moving fast. Whatever was happening here, I needed to get home and make sure my family was safe. But as I walked, the voice followed me. Don't leave, Billy. Your children need their mama. Bring them to me. Now the voice knew my name too, and it was talking like I should bring my children to her. Every instinct I had as a father was screaming danger. I made it back to my truck just as another family was setting up camp near the trail entrance. The Chens, a young couple with a 7-year-old boy named Tommy. The same name as my son. Excuse me, I called to them. I'm Ranger Mackenzie. I need to ask you folks to consider camping somewhere else today. Mr. Chen looked confused. Is there some kind of danger? I wasn't sure how to explain without sounding crazy. We've had some reports of unusual wildlife activity in this area. For safety, I'd recommend the campground near Cataract Falls instead. Mrs. Chen was unpacking their camping gear while their son Tommy explored the edge of the clearing. Tommy, don't go too far, she called. That's when I saw him. Little Tommy Chen was walking straight toward the tree line, but he wasn't walking like a normal kid explores. He was walking like someone was calling him. His head was tilted to one side like he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. Tommy, his father called, but the boy didn't respond. I ran after him and caught his arm just as he reached the trees. Hey there, buddy. Where are you going? Tommy looked up at me with confused eyes. The nice lady wants to show me something. She says she has toys for me to play with. What nice lady? The one who's crying. She says she's been looking for children like me for a long time. She says if I come with her, I'll never have to be scared or sad again. Mr. and Mrs. Chen reached us, both looking frightened. I knelt down to Tommy's eye level. Tommy, I need you to listen to me very carefully. If you hear that lady calling again, you don't go to here. Or you come find me or your parents immediately. Can you promise me that? He nodded, but his eyes kept drifting back toward the trees. I convinced the Chens to pack up and leave, but I could see they thought I was overreacting. As they drove away, Mrs. Chen rolled down her window. Ranger Mackenzie, is there really something dangerous in those woods? I looked back at the tree line, where shadows seemed to move, even though there was no wind. Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 14 years. I've seen bears, rattlesnakes, flash floods, and every kind of natural danger these mountains can throw at people. But what's in those woods, it's not natural, and it wants children. That afternoon, I drove to the Cherokee Reservation to talk to Joseph Walking Stick, an elder I'd worked with on a few search and rescue operations. Joseph knew the old stories better than anyone. Joseph, I need to ask you about Rattlesnake Hollow, the old Cherokee stories about that place. His face went serious immediately. What have you seen, Billy? I told him everything. The crying woman, the voices calling children's names, the strange collection of items, the way kids seemed drawn toward the dangerous parts of the hollow. Joseph was quiet for a long time. Then he said, the Cherokee called that place Where the Mother Weeps. Long time ago, maybe 1830s, there was a Cherokee woman named Ayanna. She had 3 children, a girl about 8, a boy about 6, and a baby girl. My heart started beating faster. Those were the same ages as my own children. When the soldiers came to force our people west, Ayanna hid her children in the hollow. She thought they'd be safe there while she dealt with the soldiers. But when she came back, Joseph shook his head. She never found them. Some say they fell into one of the hidden sinkholes. Others say they got lost and died of cold. Ayanna searched for Months, calling their names, crying for them. What happened to her? She died in that hollow, still looking for her children. The Cherokee elders say her spirit never accepted that they were gone. She keeps looking. And sometimes she tries to take other children to replace the ones she lost. Is there a way to stop her? Joseph looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. Billy, you got children of your own. Same ages as the ones she lost, ain't that right? I nodded. Then you better keep them far away from that hollow. Because Ayanna, she don't just take any children. She takes the ones that remind her most of what she lost. That night I got home to find my wife Carol putting the children to bed. Everything seemed normal, but I noticed that Sarah was clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit tighter than usual. Bad dreams again? I asked her. She nodded. The crying lady came back, but this time she wasn't sad. She was happy. She said she found us, and she's coming to take us home. 3 days later, I got the call I'd been dreading. Ranger Mackenzie, this is emergency dispatch. We have a missing child at Rattlesnake Hollow, 7-year-old Jessica Palmer. Family says she walked into the woods around midnight last night. I grabbed my gear and drove to the hollow faster than I should have. The Palmer family was frantic. Mother, father, and Jessica's 10-year-old brother, Michael. They'd been camping for 2 days when Jessica disappeared. She's not the type to wander off, Mrs. Palmer kept saying. Jessica is afraid of the dark. She won't even go to the bathroom at night without one of us. Mr. Palmer looked exhausted. Around midnight, we heard her talking to someone outside the tent. When we looked out, she was walking toward the trees. She was talking like she was having a conversation with someone, but we couldn't see anyone else. What was she saying? I asked. She kept saying, "Yes, Mama," and "I want to see them," and "Will it hurt?" When we called her name, she didn't respond. It was like she was in some kind of trance. I started the set, arch immediately, following standard protocols. But as I worked my way deeper into the hollow, I began finding things that made no sense. Children's footprints in the mud, but they were going in impossible directions. Straight toward cliff faces, directly into thick tangles of thorns, over terrain no child could navigate in the dark. I found Jessica's pajama top hanging from a branch about 10 feet off the ground. No way a 7-year-old could have gotten it that high, and no way it could have gotten caught there if she'd just brushed against the tree. Then I found the dolls. There were dozens of them, arranged in a circle around a flat rock that looked like an altar. Wooden dolls, corn husk dolls, even a few modern plastic dolls that looked like they came from the 1940s and 1950s. All of them were positioned like they were looking toward the center of the circle. In the center of the rock was a fresh bouquet of wild roses, Cherokee funeral flowers. I was photographing the scene when I heard Jessica's voice. "Daddy? Daddy, where are you?" She sounded close, maybe 50 yards away. I ran toward her voice, crashing through the underbrush, calling her name. "Jessica, keep talking, honey. I'm coming to get you." "Daddy, I'm scared. The nice lady said you were coming, but now she won't let me go home." Her voice was coming from the edge of a steep cliff. As I got closer, I could see her tiny figure standing on a narrow ledge about 20 feet down. She was wearing only her pajama bottoms, and she was crying. "Jessica, don't move. I'm going to get a rope and come down to get you." But as I turned to go back to my truck for equipment, I heard another voice, a woman's voice, speaking Cherokee. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was gentle, loving, like a mother comforting a scared child. Jessica stopped crying. She turned toward the voice and started walking along, the narrow ledge moving away from me. "Jessica, no, stop." I could see her clearly now, and what I saw made my blood freeze. She was walking along a ledge that was only about 6 inches wide, but she was walking confidently, like someone was holding her hand and guiding her steps. I ran back to my truck and radioed for help, but again, all I got was static. My radio worked fine until I got within a mile of the hollow. Then it was useless. I grabbed my climbing rope and rappelling gear and went back to the cliff. Jessica was gone. The ledge was empty. I spent the next 4 hours searching every inch of that cliff face and the rocky area below. I found Jessica Palmer at the bottom of a 200-foot drop, but she wasn't alone. Next to her body was the skeleton of a man in what looked like 1950s camping clothes. His bones were arranged in a protective position, arms wrapped around the space where Jessica lay, like he'd tried to shield her even in death. In Jessica's small hand was a wooden doll carved in Cherokee style. It was identical to the ones I'd been finding around the hollow, but this one was warm to the touch despite the cool morning air. The medical examiner later told me that Jessica Palmer died from the fall, but her injuries were consistent with being carefully placed rather than simply falling. Someone or something had arranged her body gently, and the same was true for the man's remains. When I reported back to the Palmer family, I had to watch parents receive the worst news any parent can hear. Mrs. Palmer collapsed, and Mr. Palmer just stood there in shock, asking over and over, how could she get so far? She was afraid of the dark. But it was 10-year-old Michael Palmer who said something that haunts me to this day. She wasn't afraid last night, he whispered. The lady was singing to her, Cherokee songs that made her feel safe. Jessica told me the lady promised she'd never be scared again if she went with her. That night, I went home to my family, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I checked all the windows and doors twice, and I moved the kids' beds away from the windows. Around midnight, I was awakened by the sound of my daughter Sarah talking in her sleep. Yes, Mama, I hear you. Yes, Mama, I want to come. Tommy and Beth want to come too. I rushed to her room and gently woke her up. She looked at me with confused, dreamy eyes. Daddy, why won't you let us go? The lady says she's our real mama now, and she's been looking for us for so long. She says if we come with her, we'll never have to worry about anything ever again. I spent the rest of that night sitting in the hallway between my children's rooms, watching their doors, listening for any sound that might mean the crying woman had found them. But the scariest part was that I was starting to hear her too. Just at the edge of my hearing, like a radio station that's almost tuned in, I could hear a woman's voice singing Cherokee lullabies and whispering my children's names with infinite love and terrible longing. The next morning I called in sick and drove back to see Joseph Walking Stick. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Joseph, it's getting worse. She killed a child yesterday, and now she's coming for my family. There has to be something we can do. Joseph listened to everything I told him about Jessica Palmer, about the dreams my children were having, about the voice that was getting stronger every night. Billy, Ayanna's spirit has been growing stronger because she's been taking children. Every child she claims gives her more power to reach the living world. But why my children specifically? You said your Sarah is 8, Tommy is 6, and Beth is 4? I nodded. Ayanna's children were 8, 6, and 4 when she lost them. And you work in the forest just like she used to gather food in those same woods. In her mind, you're the father who can give her back the family she lost. How do I stop her? Joseph was quiet for a long time. There's a Cherokee ritual for laying troubled spirits to rest, but it's dangerous. You'd have to go to the place where she died, bring offerings for her, lost children, and convince her spirit to let go of this world. What kind of offerings? Things that represent the children she lost, toys, clothes, food, things a mother would give her children. But Billy, if the ritual doesn't work, if you can't convince her to rest, she'll be angry. And an angry spirit, what happens then? An angry spirit stops trying to save children by taking them gently. An angry spirit just takes them. I went home to find my wife Carol packing suitcases. We're leaving, she said without looking at me. I don't care if you think I'm crazy. All 3 kids had the same dream last night. They dreamed about a woman who said she was coming to get them today. Sarah drew a picture of her. She handed me a piece of paper. Sarah had drawn a tall woman with long black hair, wearing a torn dress. The woman was holding hands with 3 small figures, a girl, a boy, and a baby. At the top of the paper, Sarah had written, "Our new mama." Carol, pack the kids and go to your mother's house. I have to go back to the hollow one more time. Bill, no. Whatever's happening there, you need to stay away from it. I can't. If I don't stop this now, she'll keep coming for them. She'll follow them anywhere. That afternoon, I gathered the items Joseph had told me about. children's clothes, toys, and traditional Cherokee foods. I also brought something else, a framed photo of my own 3 children. I drove to Rattlesnake Hollow just before sunset. The place felt different now, heavier, like the air itself was thick with sadness and longing. As I walked deeper into the hollow, carrying my offerings, I could hear her voice clearly for the first time. She was singing a Cherokee lullaby, and her voice was beautiful and heartbreaking. It was the voice of a mother who had loved her children more than life itself. I found her at the place where I'd discovered he first stone circle. She was kneeling beside a small grave marked with 3 wooden crosses. The crosses looked old and weathered, like they'd been there for over a century. When she looked up at me, I saw her clearly for the first time. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe in her 20s. Her long black hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her buckskin dress was torn and stained. But it was her eyes that broke my heart. They held all the grief of a mother who had lost everything. "You brought them to me," she said in English, but with a Cherokee accent. "My children. You brought my Sarah, my Tommy, my little Beth." "No," I said gently. "Those are my children. Your children are here." I pointed to the 3 small crosses. "Your children are at rest. They're waiting for you to join them." Her face changed, becoming confused and angry. "No, my children are lost. They're calling for their mama. I hear them crying in the woods every night." "Ayanna," I said, using her Cherokee name. "Your children died a long time ago. You've been searching for over 100 years. It's time to rest." She stood up, and I could see that she was no longer entirely human. Her form flickered like heat waves, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent. When she spoke again, her voice carried the sound of wind through empty valleys. "I will not rest until I have my children back. I will take your Sarah, your Tommy, your Beth. I will love them and protect them forever. They're not your children to take. All children are my children now," she screamed, and the sound made the trees shake. "Every child lost in these woods becomes mine. Every child who dies afraid and alone comes to me. I am the mother of all lost children." That's when I understood. Jessica Palmer wasn't Ayanna's first victim. She'd been taking lost children for decades, maybe longer. Every child who had ever disappeared, Red in Rattlesnake Hollow, had become part of her ghostly family. I placed my offerings at the base of the 3 crosses, toys and clothes and food, and the photo of my own children. "These are for your real children," I said. "Sarah, Tommy, and Beth Mackenzie are going to grow up safe and loved with their real family. But I want to honor the memory of your children too." For a moment, Ayanna's expression softened. She knelt beside the offerings and touched them gently. "They were so small," she whispered. "They must have been so scared when the soldiers came. I should have stayed with them." "You were trying to protect them. That's what mothers do." But then her face hardened again. "It's not enough. I need them back. I need to hold them again." She reached toward me, and I felt a cold that went deeper than my bones. But then I heard something that changed everything. Children's voices, calling from the direction of the 3 crosses. Cherokee children, speaking in their native language, but I could understand them somehow. "Mama, we're here. Mama, we're safe now. Mama, please come home." Ayanna froze. She turned toward the voices, and for the first time in over a century, she saw her real children. They were standing by their graves, 3 small figures in traditional Cherokee clothes glowing with soft light. The girl who looked 8, the boy who looked 6, and a tiny girl who couldn't have been more than 4. "My babies," Ayanna whispered. "Mama, we've been waiting for you," the oldest child said. "We've been trying to tell you we're okay, but you wouldn't listen. We want to go to the spirit world with you, Mama, but you have to let go of the children who aren't ours." Ayanna looked back at me, then at the photo of my children, then at her own children's spirits. "But if I let them go, I'll be alone again." "No, Mama," the little boy said. "You'll be with us. Forever. Ayanna walked toward her children, and as she did, her form became more transparent. She was choosing to let go of the physical world, to stop fighting death and accept peace. Just Pantos. But before she faded completely, she turned back to me one last time. Keep your children close, Bill Mackenzie. Love them every day. Don't make the mistake I made. Then she was gone, and the hollow fell silent for the first time in over a century. I stayed in that clearing until dawn, making sure the spirits had really gone. The oppressive feeling that had hung over the hollow was gone, replaced by normal forest sounds, birds singing, insects buzzing, wind rustling through leaves. When I got home, I found my family safe at Carol's mother's house. My children looked normal again. No more dark circles under their eyes, no more talk about crying ladies or dreams of ghostly mothers. But Sarah asked me one question that let me know she remembered everything. Daddy, is the sad lady with her real children now? Yes, sweetheart. She found them, and they're all together. Good, Sarah said. She was so lonely, and her babies were scared without their mama. I returned to work at Cherokee National Forest, but I requested a transfer away from Rattlesnake Hollow. I told my supervisor it was for family reasons, which was true enough. The hollow is quiet now. Families camp there without incident, and children play in the woods without being called by ghostly voices. The Cherokee Tribal Council placed a small memorial at the site where Ayanna's children were buried, honoring them and their mother. But I still think about that night sometimes. I think about how grief can become so powerful that it refuses to accept reality. I think about how love can become twisted when it has nowhere to go. And I think about Robert Palmer, Jessica's father. 2 days after I performed the ritual to lay Ayanna's spirit to rest, Robert Palmer drove to Rattlesnake Hollow alone. He hiked to the place where his daughter died and jumped from the same cliff. They found his body at the bottom, arms wrapped protectively around empty air, just like the skeleton we'd found beside Jessica. Even in death, he was trying to save his little girl. The medical examiner said Robert Palmer died from the fall, but I know better. Robert Palmer died from the same thing that kept Ayanna's spirit trapped for over a century. Love that couldn't accept loss. Grief that refused to heal. I retired early from the Forest Service and moved my family to a small town in Georgia, far from any Cherokee National Forest. My children are grown now, with families of their own. Sarah became a teacher, Tommy became a doctor, and Beth became a social worker who helps families in crisis. They don't remember the details of what happened that summer when they were little, but they all became adults who understand the importance of protecting children. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I still hear echoes of Cherokee lullabies. But they're peaceful now, not desperate. They're the songs of a mother who finally found her way home. And sometimes, when I'm tucking in my grandchildren, I whisper a little prayer of gratitude to Ayanna's spirit. Because she taught me something important. Every day we have with our children is a gift. Every night we get to tuck them into safe beds. Every morning we get to see their faces. These are miracles that too many parents take for granted. The wailing woman of Rattlesnake Hollow is at rest now. But her story isn't really about ghosts or Cherokee legends or supernatural terror. It's about what happens when love has nowhere to go. And it's a reminder that the most important thing we can do as parents is to love our children while we have them, completely and without reservation, so that if the worst ever happens, we can let them go knowing we gave them everything we had. Because some mothers never stop searching for their children, and some children never stop calling for their mothers. But when love finally finds its way to peace, even the deepest grief can rest. My name is Bobby Ironwood, and I spent 17 years as a park ranger in George Washington National Forest. Before that, I was in Vietnam with a canine unit. I learned a lot about dogs over there. How they think, how they track, how they know things we don't. When I came back, working with Rex, my German Shepherd, felt like the only thing that made sense. Rex was the best search dog I ever worked with. In our years together, we found 156 missing people, some alive, some not, but we found them all. That dog could track a scent through rain, snow, or 3 days of heat. He never let me down, not once. That's why what happened at Devil's Creek still keeps me up at night. Because Rex knew something was wrong before I did. Dogs always know first. It was February 1972, and we'd been getting reports about Devil's Creek for weeks. Hunters going missing. Their dogs coming back alone, shaking and covered in something that smelled like rotten eggs. The local sheriff figured it was just bad luck. Maybe a bear, maybe the cold getting to people. But the hunters who made it back told strange stories. They said the whole valley felt wrong, like something was watching them. I didn't believe in ghost stories. After Vietnam, I'd seen enough real monsters to know they came with human faces. But Sheriff Martinez asked me to take a look anyway. The latest missing hunter was Jim Kowalski, a local guy who knew those woods better than anyone. His retriever, Buster, had come home 3 days ago without him. Dog won't eat, won't sleep, Jim's wife told me, tears in her eyes. Just sits by the door whining. Something scared him real bad. I loaded my gear into the truck. Radio, first aid kit, rope, the works. Rex jumped in the passenger seat like always, but he was acting strange. Usually he got excited about a search, tail wagging, ready to work. This time he just sat there, staring out at the road that led to Devil's Creek. The drive took 2 hours through winding mountain roads. The deeper we went, the quieter Rex got. By the time we reached the trailhead, he was pressed against the door, whimpering. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. His fur was standing up like he'd been shocked. The trail down to Devil's Creek was steep and rocky. Ice covered everything from the storm the night before, making each step dangerous. But that wasn't what bothered me. It was the silence. No birds, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like the forest was holding its breath. Rex walked close to my leg instead of ranging ahead like he usually did. Every few steps he'd stop and look back toward the truck like he wanted to leave. I'd never seen him act like this, not in all our years together. "Come on, Rex, we've got a job to do." But as we walked deeper into the valley, I started to understand his fear. Something was definitely wrong here. The trees looked normal, the creek bubbled along like it should, but underneath it all was a feeling I couldn't shake, like walking into a house where something terrible had happened, even if you didn't know what. We found Jim's campsite about a mile down the trail. His tent was still up, gear scattered around, but no sign of struggle. His rifle leaned against a tree, loaded and ready. Coffee pot sat cold on dead ashes. It looked like he'd just stepped away for a minute, except he'd been gone for 4 days. Rex wouldn't even enter the campsite. He sat at the edge, whining deep in his throat. When I tried to lead him in, he planted his feet and refused to budge. "What is it, boy? What do you smell?" I knelt down and checked the ground myself. There were Jim's boot prints leading away from camp toward the creek. And there were other prints, too. Paw prints, but bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. Bigger than Rex. Bigger than any wolf. The prints were pressed deep into the frozen mud, like whatever made them weight a lot more than it should. I followed the trail, toward the water. The paw prints seemed to glow faintly in the afternoon light, though that had to be ice crystals playing tricks on my eyes. But the smell Rex had been reacting to got stronger, that rotten egg stench mixed with something else, something that reminded me of wet dog, but wrong somehow. At the creek bank, Jim's trail just stopped. His boot prints led right to the water's edge. Then nothing. No sign he'd crossed. No sign he'd turned back. Just gone. But the big paw prints continued. They went right into the creek and came out the other side, heading toward a series of limestone caves I could see carved into the hillside. That's when I heard it. A howl that made Rex lose control of his bladder right there on the spot. Not like any dog or wolf I'd ever heard. It was deeper, angrier, and it seemed to come from underground. Like something was calling from inside the mountain itself. Rex bolted. My trained professional search dog turned and ran back toward the truck like his tail was on fire. I had to chase after him, slipping on the ice, my heart pounding harder than it had since Vietnam. When I caught up to him, he was pressed against the truck door, scratching to get in. His eyes were wide and white around the edges, the way they got during thunderstorms. But worse. Much worse. I looked back toward the creek. In the distance, I could see those caves carved into the hillside. Dark openings that seemed to swallow the daylight. Jim Kowalski was down there somewhere. I was sure of it. But as I watched, I saw something move between the cave mouths. Something big and dark that shouldn't have been there. Rex was right to be scared. We both were. I spent that first night at the ranger station trying to make sense of what we'd found. The paw prints bothered me most. I'd measured them, 8 inches long, 4 inches wide, with claw marks that gouged deep scrack. He's in solid rock near the creek. No dog made tracks like that. Hell, no animal I knew made tracks like that. Rex wouldn't eat his dinner. He'd just lay by the door, watching the darkness outside. Every now and then he'd whimper and look at me like he was trying to tell me something important. I know, boy, something's not right down there. The next morning, Sheriff Martinez brought in Carl Morrison from the State Wildlife Department. Carl had 20 years tracking problem animals, bears that got too close to towns, rabid foxes, that kind of thing. He took one look at the photos I'd taken of the paw prints and shook his head. Biggest dog prints I ever saw, he said. But that's what they are, dog prints. Maybe German shepherds or Rottweilers gone wild. Happens more than you'd think. People dump dogs they can't handle, and they form packs. Dogs don't make prints this deep in frozen ground, I said. Not unless they weigh 300 pounds. Carl shrugged. Maybe they're just old prints that got bigger from melting and refreezing. Ice does funny things. He had tranquilizer equipment in his truck and a cage big enough for large dogs. The plan was simple. Find the pack, sedate the alpha, and the rest would scatter. Then we could search for Jim properly. But when we got back to Devil's Creek with Rex, things had gotten worse. The whole area around Jim's campsite was torn up. His tent was shredded into ribbons. His gear was scattered across a 100-yard area like something had grabbed it and thrown it around in a rage. But strangest of all, every piece of his equipment that was made of metal, his knife, his compass, his belt buckle, was arranged in a perfect circle around his dead campfire. Animals don't do that, Carl said quietly. Rex refused to get out of the truck this time. I had to carry him, and he shook in my arms like he was freezing, though it wasn't, but that cold. We followed the paw prints toward the caves again. In daylight, they looked even stranger. Some of them seemed to fade in and out like they were only there when you looked at wall, them sideways. And the smell was stronger, that rotten egg stench mixed with wet dog and something else. Something that reminded me of the tunnels in Vietnam, where we'd lost Miller and Jackson and the others. There, Carl pointed toward the caves. Movement in the third opening from the left. I squinted where he was pointing. At first, I didn't see anything. Then something shifted in the shadows, and I caught a glimpse of eyes. Red eyes, glowing like coals in the darkness. Jesus, Carl whispered. How big is that thing? The eyes were at least 4 feet off the ground, which meant we were looking at something the size of a small horse. But it moved like a dog, that fluid predatory motion that meant it was ready to attack or run. Carl raised his tranquilizer gun. I'm going to try to get close enough for a shot. Wait, I said. Something's not right. Look at Rex. My dog was no longer shaking. He was standing rigid, ears forward, staring at the caves. But he wasn't looking at the opening where we'd seen the eyes. He was looking at all of them, like he could see things we couldn't. That's when the howling started. It came from everywhere at once. The caves, the trees, the ground beneath our feet. Not one animal, but many. A whole pack, calling to each other in voices that made my teeth hurt. Rex threw back his head and howled in response, but his howl was pure terror. And then they answered him. The sound that came back wasn't like anything that should exist. It was howling, but wrong. Too deep, too angry, too intelligent. Like dogs that had learned to hate. We need to get out of here, I said. But Carl was already moving toward the caves, tranquilizer gun ready. There's a man down there. Maybe more than one. We're not leaving without them. Carl, don't... He was 20 feet from the cave entrance when they came out. I'd been expecting dogs. Big dogs, sure. But dogs. What I saw instead made my brain struggle to understand what my eyes were telling me. They looked like German shepherds and bloodhounds, but wrong. Their fur was patchy and gray, like old carpet. Their eyes glowed red in the shadows. And I could see through them. Not completely, but like looking through dirty glass. But the worst part was their mouths. When they opened them to snarl, I could see that their teeth went all the way back to their throats, row after row, like a shark. Carl, run! He fired the tranquilizer gun. The dart went right through the lead animal like it was made of smoke. The creature didn't even slow down. Carl screamed, not like a man facing wild animals, but like someone who'd seen something that broke his understanding of the world. He turned to run, but more of the things were coming out of the other caves. 6 of them, moving in perfect coordination, cutting off his escape. I had my service pistol, but I already knew bullets wouldn't help. These weren't animals. They weren't even alive, not in any way that made sense. Carl's scream cut off suddenly. When the pack moved away from where he'd been standing, there was nothing left but his equipment, arranged in that same perfect circle around his hat. Rex was pulling at his leash, trying to drag me back toward the truck. For once, I listened to him. We ran. Behind us the howling followed, but it was different now, satisfied, like they'd gotten what they came for. Back at the truck, I tried to radio for help, but the radio just gave me static. No matter which channel I tried, no matter how I adjusted the antenna, nothing but white noise with something that almost sounded like barking in the background. Rex jumped into the driver's seat and pressed his nose against the horn. 3 short blasts. He'd never done anything like that before. You're right, boy. We need backup. Lots of it. B. But as I started the engine, I looked back at the caves one more time. In each dark opening, I could see pairs of red eyes watching us leave, counting us, learning us. Jim Kowalski was down, there somewhere. So was Carl Morrison, or what was left of him. But whatever was guarding those caves wasn't going to let us take them back without a fight. And I was starting to realize that we weren't dealing with wild dogs at all. We were dealing with something that had been waiting in those caves for a very long time, and now it was awake. I drove straight to the sheriff's office, Rex panting in the passenger seat like he'd run a marathon. Sheriff Martinez took one look at my face and knew something bad had happened. "Where's Carl?" he asked. "Gone. Same as Jim." I set Carl's hat on his desk, the only thing left of him. "We need the state police. Hell, we need the National Guard." "Bobby, slow down. What happened?" I told him about the caves, the red eyes, the things that looked like dogs but weren't. I told him about Carl's tranquilizer dart going right through them. I knew how crazy it sounded even as I was saying it. Martinez rubbed his forehead. "You're telling me there's a pack of ghost dogs in Devil's Creek? I'm telling you there's something down there that's killing people. And it's not natural." He wanted to send in a full search team the next morning. 8 men with rifles and radio equipment. I tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen. "We've got 3 men missing, Bobby. I can't just write that off because you saw some weird dogs." That night I couldn't sleep. Rex paced the cabin, whining and scratching at the door. Around midnight he started howling, not his usual howl, but something I'd never heard from him before, desperate, warning. I let him outside and he ran to the edge of the woods behind my cabin. He stood there barking at something I couldn't see, fur standing straight up. That's when I heard it, answering howls from the direction of Devil's Creek. But they were closer than they should be, much closer. "Rex, get back here." I didn't want to come, but he obeyed. We went back inside and I locked the door. For the first time since Vietnam, I slept with my pistol under my pillow. The search team went in the next morning without me. Martinez said I was too shaken up from losing Carl. Maybe he was right. But Rex and I waited by the radio anyway, listening for their check-ins. The first few hours went fine. Radio crackled with normal search chatter. They found Jim's destroyed campsite, confirmed Carl's equipment arranged in that strange circle. Everything matched what I'd told them. Then, around noon, the radio went quiet. Base to Search Team 1, report your position. Static. Search Team 1, respond. More static, but underneath it, something that sounded like whimpering. Martinez grabbed the microphone. Anyone out there, respond immediately. The radio crackled, and we heard Deputy Williams's voice, but it was wrong. Too high, too scared. They're in the trees, he whispered. They're in the goddamn trees, looking down at us. How are they in the trees? Williams, what's your location? The eyes. Oh God, the eyes are everywhere. They're not touching the branches. They're just floating there, watching us. The radio went dead. Martinez was already grabbing his gear. I'm going in after them. No, I said. You send anyone else down there, you're just feeding it more people. Feeding what, Bobby? What the hell is down there? I couldn't explain it in a way that would make sense. How do you tell someone that the forest itself had turned against us? That there were things hunting in those woods that shouldn't exist? But Rex knew. He'd been trying to tell me all along. Give me one more try, I said. Just Rex and me. No radios, no backup. If we don't come back by sunset, you call in the state police, the FBI, whoever you can get. Martinez looked at Rex, who was sitting by my feet, calm for the first time in days, like he knew what was coming and had accepted it. Your dog's braver than my deputies, Martinez said. We drove back to Devil's Creek in the late afternoon. The winter sun was already low, casting long shadows between the trees. Rex sat in the passenger seat, alert but not afraid anymore. He'd made some kind of decision. At the trailhead, I checked my equipment one more time. Pistol loaded, extra magazines, flashlight, rope. Not that any of it would help against what we'd seen before, but it made me feel better. Okay, boy, let's go find our people. But as we started down the trail, I realized we weren't alone. There were footprints in the snow, 8 sets of boots heading toward the caves. The search team had made it this far. But coming back out, there was only one set of prints. And those ended at a tree about halfway down the trail, like whoever made them had just vanished into thin air. Rex sniffed the tree and whimpered. Carved into the bark about 7 feet up were claw marks, fresh ones. That's when we heard the first howl of the night. Close, too close. I turned around, and they were there. 6 of them, standing in the trail behind us. The ghost dogs from the caves, but clearer now in the twilight. I could see their ribs through their patchy fur. I could see the steam rising from their mouths in the cold air. And I could see that they were smiling. Dogs don't smile. But these things did, showing all those rows of shark teeth. Rex growled low in his throat, but he didn't run. He stepped in front of me, ready to fight. Good boy, I whispered. Good boy. The lead dog, the biggest one, with glowing red eyes like headlights, tilted its head and looked at me. Really looked, like it was trying to figure out what I was thinking. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. Not barked, spoke, in Carl Morrison's voice. Bobby, it said. Bobby, why didn't you save me? I nearly dropped my flashlight. The thing was using Carl's voice, but wrong. Like someone trying to remember how Carl talked, but getting the details mixed up. Bobby, another one said in Jim Kowalski's voice. I'm so cold down here. Why won't you come help me? They're not Jim and Carl, I said to Rex, as much to convince myself as him. There's something else, something wearing their voices. But the doubt was there. What if Jim and Carl were trapped somehow? What if these things were keeping them prisoner? The pack started moving closer, spreading out to surround us. Rex backed up against my legs, still growling. That's when I saw the 7th one. It came out of the trees to our left, and it was different from the others. Bigger. Its eyes weren't red, but yellow, like old brass. And when it looked at me, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Because I knew this dog. I'd known him 20 years ago in a tunnel system outside Saigon. Sergeant, it said in my own voice from 20 years ago. Sergeant Ironwood, why didn't you come back for us? It was Ranger, my partner in Vietnam. My dog before Rex. The one who'd died in the tunnels with Miller and Jackson when the whole system collapsed. The one I'd left behind. "You're not Ranger," I said, but my voice shook. "Ranger died in Vietnam. I saw him die." The thing that looked like my old partner stepped closer. In the fading light, I could see details that made my heart pound. The scar on his left ear from shrapnel, the way he held his head when he was concentrating, even the way he moved, that confident lope that had carried him through a dozen missions. "You left me in the dark," it said in my voice. "You left us all in the dark." Rex pressed against my leg, whining. He could sense my confusion, my guilt, because the ghost dog was right. I had left them. When the tunnel collapsed, I'd been outside, safe. Miller, Jackson, and Ranger had been inside when the charges went off. "The mission required," I started. "The mission required sacrifice," the Ranger T. Hing interrupted. "Your sacrifice. But you sent us instead." The other ghost dogs closed in around us, forming a circle. Each one spoke in the voice of someone I'd failed to save. Not just Carl and Jim, but people from years of searches. People I'd found too late. People I'd never found at all. "Susan Martinez," one said in a little girl's voice. "Lost in the blizzard of '68. You found me 3 days too late." "Michael Torres," another said. "Fell in the ravine while you were searching the wrong ridge." "We're all here, Bobby," the Ranger thing said. "Everyone you couldn't save. Everyone you left behind." I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. 20 years of guilt pressed down on me like the weight of that collapsed tunnel. Maybe they were right. Maybe I deserved whatever they had planned. But Rex didn't think so. My German shepherd stepped forward, placing himself between me and the ghost pack. He barked once, sharp and commanding. The sound echoed off the trees, and for a moment the ghost dogs hesitated. Rex barked again, and this time I heard something else in his voice. Not fear, not aggression, but authority. He was calling them out, challenging them. "What's he doing?" I whispered. The Ranger thing snarled, showing those rows of teeth. "Your dog doesn't understand. This isn't about him." But Rex kept barking, and with each bark, the ghost dog seemed to get less solid, less real, like Rex's living voice was somehow disrupting whatever was holding them together. That's when I understood. These weren't really the people I'd failed to save. They were something else, something feeding on my guilt, using it to take shape. And Rex, with his simple dog logic, could see through the deception. "You're not them," I said, louder this time. "You're not the people I couldn't save." The Ranger thing's eyes flared brighter. "We are everyone you left in the dark." "No, Ranger died fighting. He wouldn't blame me for following orders. And the others?" I thought about Susan Martinez, the little girl lost in the blizzard. Her family had thanked me for finding her, even though it was too late. They'd said at least now they could bury her properly, give her peace. The people I couldn't save, they wouldn't want revenge. They'd want me to save the people I still can. The ghost dogs started to flicker like candle flames in the wind, but the Ranger thing stood firm. "Then prove it," it said. "Come with us. Save the ones who are still alive." "What?" "Jim Kowalski, Carl Morrison, your search team. They're not dead, Bobby. They're trapped. Down in the caves in the dark, waiting for you to come get them." I looked at the cave mouths in the distance. "They're alive?" "For now, but not for long. The longer you wait, the more they become like us." Rex whined and nudged my hand with his nose. When I looked down at him, he was looking back toward the truck, toward safety. But he was also looking at me with those brown eyes that had never lied to me, never failed me. And I could see what he was thinking as clearly as if he'd spoken. "Your choice. I'll follow you either way." I looked back at the ghost dogs, already fading in the twilight. "If I go with you, if I try to save them, what happens to me?" The Ranger thing smiled with too many teeth. "Same thing that happens to everyone who goes into the dark, Sergeant. You either come back out, or you don't. And Rex, dogs don't belong in the place we're going. Leave him here." I almost said yes. Almost handed Rex's leash to a tree branch and followed the ghost dogs into those limestone caves. Because if there was even a chance that Jim and Carl and the others were still alive, I had to try. But Rex growled, not at the ghost dogs, but at me, warning me. And suddenly, I understood what he'd been trying to tell me all along. These things didn't want to help me save anyone. They wanted to add me to their collection. They'd been hunting me from the beginning, using my guilt as bait. "No," I said. "I'm not leaving my partner behind, not again." The ranger thing's face twisted with rage. "Then you'll watch him die like you watched me die." They attacked all at once, but Rex was ready. As the ghost dogs leaped, he met them head on, not trying to bite or scratch, but simply standing his ground. And wherever his body touched theirs, they dissolved like smoke. I understood then. Rex wasn't just a living dog. He was loyal, brave, and true. Everything these twisted spirits weren't. His very presence was poison to them. But there were too many. For every one Rex drove off, 2 more came at us from different angles. I drew my pistol and fired, not expecting the bullets to work, but needing to do something. To my surprise, the bullets did work. Not much, but enough. Where they hit the ghost dogs, pieces of shadow scattered like ash. The creatures yelped and backed away. The bullets are blessed, I realized. Sheriff Martinez was a Catholic. He'd had the department weapons blessed by Father Rodriguez years ago, after a deputy was killed in the line of duty. I fired again and again. Each shot bought us a few seconds. But I only had so many bullets, and the ghost dogs were regrouping. That's when Rex did something that broke my heart and saved my life. He ran straight at the ranger thing, the biggest and strongest of the pack. As they collided, there was a flash of light like lightning, and both of them disappeared. The other ghost dogs vanished instantly, like Rex had taken their power source with him. I was alone in the forest, with an empty gun and no dog. "Rex!" I called. "Rex, where are you?" No answer. Just the wind in the trees and the sound of water running over rocks. I searched for Rex until dawn, calling his name until my voice gave out, but there was no sign of him anywhere. No body, no tracks, nothing. He'd vanished as completely as the ghost dogs had. When the state police arrived that morning, they found me sitting by the creek holding Rex's collar. It was all I had left of him. They found the others too. Jim Kowalski's body was in the deepest cave, arranged like he was sleeping. Carl Morrison was there too, along with the 8-man search team. All dead, but not torn apart like I'd expected. They looked peaceful, like they'd just laid down and never woken up. The coroner said they'd died of exposure, probably got lost in the cave system and couldn't find their way out. The strange arrangements of their equipment, just the way their gear scattered when they fell. The claw marks on the trees, bears looking for food before winter. Nobody wanted to hear about ghost dogs or glowing eyes or voices that spoke with the words of the dead. So I stopped talking about them. I retired from the Park Service 6 months later. Couldn't bring myself to work with another dog after Rex. Couldn't stand the thought of having a partner who might sacrifice himself for me again. But I kept going back to Devil's Creek, not to the caves. I never went near those again, just to the creek itself, where Rex had made his choice. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon was full, I'd hear howling from the direction of the caves. But it was different now, lonely, angry, like something was trapped down there and couldn't get out. Other times I'd hear a single bark echoing through the valley, strong and clear and familiar. Rex, maybe, still on patrol, still protecting people from things they couldn't understand. I never saw him again, but sometimes, when I was walking the trails around Devil's Creek, I'd find paw prints in the mud that looked like his, always between the caves and any hikers or hunters who might wander too close, like he was still doing his job. The locals learned to stay away from Devil's Creek after that winter. Word got around that it was bad luck to hunt there, too easy to get lost in the cave system, too easy to have an accident. But I knew the truth. Rex was down there somewhere, keeping watch, making sure that whatever had been sleeping in those caves stayed asleep. He was a good dog, the best partner I ever had, and he's still out there, doing what he was trained to do, protecting people from the dark. Sometimes I think about going back down into those caves trying to find him, but I know better now. Rex made his choice to save me, and I have to respect that. The best way I can honor his sacrifice is to stay alive, stay safe, and make sure other people know to stay away from Devil's Creek. Because the ghost dogs are still down there, waiting. Maybe weaker now without their leader, but not gone. And if someone else goes looking for treasure in those limestone caves, if someone else gets too curious about the old stories of Confederate gold hidden in the mountain, well, they might find more than they bargained for. But they won't find it easily. Not while Rex is on patrol. I'm 74 years old now, and I still dream about that night. But they're not nightmares anymore. They're dreams about a German shepherd with brown eyes and a loyal heart, standing guard in the darkness, making sure the living stay safe from the dead. Rex never learned to heal when he was alive. But he learned something better. He learned that some things are worth dying for, and some jobs never end. My name is Jonathan Whitehorse, badge number 3394. I've been a ranger here in the Chattahoochee National Forest for 13 years now, and in all that time, I never believed the old stories my Cherokee grandmother used to tell me. Stories about things that walk between worlds, things that shouldn't exist in places like Blood Mountain. I should have listened to her. Blood Mountain sits 4,458 feet above sea level, the highest peak in Georgia. It's a beautiful place in early fall, the leaves turning red and gold, the air crisp and clean. But it's also an old place, older than the Appalachian Trail that cuts across its rocky spine. The Cherokee called it a sacred site, and some of the elders still won't go there after dark. At 35, I figured I knew these mountains better than anyone. I could track a deer through a thunderstorm and find my way home in a blizzard. Hell, I taught wilderness survival classes to other rangers. My divorce papers called me obsessed with work, and maybe that was true. These mountains were my life. That Tuesday in October started normal enough. The morning fog hung thick in the valleys, and I was heading up to investigate some complaints from hikers. 3 separate groups had reported being followed by something on the Blood Mountain Trail. They all said the same weird thing. It moved like a man, but felt like smoke. I figured it was probably just some local kids playing pranks, or maybe a black bear acting strange. Bears can walk on 2 legs sometimes, especially when they're curious about humans. It wouldn't be the first time fear turned a normal animal into a monster story. The hike to Blood Mountain takes about 4 hours if you know the shortcuts. I did. My Silva compass pointed true north, and my topographic maps showed every ridge and creek. I carried my emergency flare gun, standard radio, and enough supplies for 2 days. It's another routine investigation. But as I climbed higher, something felt wrong. The woods were too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, not even the buzz of insects. In 13 years, I'd never heard silence like that on Blood Mountain. It was like the forest was holding its breath. I stopped at Neal's Gap to check in with headquarters. The radio crackled with static, which was odd since I usually got clear reception there. I tried again. More static. The GPS on my belt showed my location, but the numbers kept jumping around. First, it said I was at the Gap, then 3 miles north, then somewhere that didn't exist on any map. That should have been my first real warning. I kept climbing anyway. The trail wound through thick patches of mountain laurel and rhododendron, creating natural tunnels where the light barely reached. The fog was getting thicker instead of burning off like it should have. My boots crunched on fallen leaves, and the sound seemed too loud in the unnatural quiet. Then I saw the first footprint. It was pressed deep into the mud beside the trail, a perfect human footprint, size 11 or 12. But there was something wrong with it. The heel was too narrow, and the toes were spread too far apart, like someone had tried to make a human print but didn't quite remember how feet worked. I knelt down to get a better look, pulling out my measuring tape. The print was definitely fresh, maybe an hour old. But as I followed the trail of prints, they started to change. The next one looked more like a bare foot. The one after that showed claw marks at the toes. Then they just stopped, not faded away or got covered by leaves, just stopped, right in the middle of solid rock. I searched for 20 minutes, looking for where the tracks picked up again. Nothing. Whoever or whatever made those prints had vanished. I'd been tracking animals and people for over a decade. Nobody disappears on solid rock. Nobody. I radioed headquarters again. This time I got through to dispatch, but my voice sounded strange even to me. This is Ranger. Whitehorse, badge 3394. I'm about 2 miles up from Neal's Gap investigating those harassment reports. Found some unusual tracks, but they don't lead anywhere. Copy that, John. What kind of tracks we talking about? I stared down at the last footprint, still clear in the mud. Started human, ended up looking more like, I don't know, wolf maybe? But bigger. Much bigger. You thinking rabid animal? We had that problem down in Brasstown Bald last month. Maybe. But I didn't believe it. Rabid animals don't leave human footprints. They don't vanish into thin air either. I kept climbing. The fog was so thick now, I could barely see 10 feet ahead. My watch said it was noon, but the light felt wrong, too dim, like late evening. The temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees in the past hour. That's when I heard the whispers. At first I thought it was wind through the trees, but there was no wind. The fog hung perfectly still, and the whispers came from all around me. Low voices speaking in what sounded like Cherokee, though I only caught a few words my grandmother had taught me. Something about shadows, something about hunger. I stopped walking and listened hard. The whispers faded, but I could feel eyes watching me from the fog. Every instinct I'd developed in 13 years of wilderness work was screaming at me to get off this mountain right now. Instead, I kept going up. The trail curved around a massive boulder, and that's where I found Mark Davidson. He was sitting with his back against a tree, perfectly still. For a second, I thought he was just resting, but then I got closer and saw his face. Mark was 23 years old. I'd seen his driver's license photo just last week when his hiking permit came through. But the man sitting against that tree looked like he was 80. His hair had gone completely white. His skin was covered in deep wrinkles, and his eyes looked like they'd seen 100 years of nightmares. Mark? I dropped my pack and knelt beside him. Mark, can you hear me? His head turned slowly, like it took all his strength. When he spoke, his voice was the whisper of an old man. He took it, Mark said. The shadow man. He took my time. Who took what? Mark, you need to focus. What happened to you? Walked with me for hours, talked to me, asked about my life, my dreams, my fears. And every word I got older. He was feeding. Mark's ancient eyes fixed on mine. He's still here. He's in the shadows now, waiting. I looked around, but the fog was too thick to see much. Mark, I need to get you to a hospital. Can you walk? Look at the ground, he whispered. Look where my shadow should be. I looked down and felt my blood freeze. Mark was sitting in direct sunlight that somehow cut through the fog. But there was no shadow beneath him. The space where his shadow should have been was burned into the ground like a permanent stain. He takes the shadows first, Mark said. Then he takes everything else. I fumbled for my radio. Dispatch, this is Whitehorse. I need immediate medical evacuation on Blood Mountain, about 3 miles up from Neal's Gap. Hiker in severe distress. Static. Nothing but static. Dispatch, do you copy? Emergency medical needed. Mark's hand grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Don't use the radio. He hears everything. He's in all the dark places now. Mark, you're in shock. You need medical attention. I'm going to get you down this mountain. No. His grip tightened. Look at your shadow. I looked down at the ground beside me. The weak sunlight should have cast my shadow clearly on the leaves, but my shadow was moving wrong. While I knelt perfectly still, my shadow was standing up. While I faced north, my shadow pointed south. And Wooly, my shadow raised one arm and waved at me. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. Shadows don't move on their own. Shadows don't wave, but mine did. He's been following you, Mark said. Probably since you started up the mountain. He likes rangers, likes people who know the old places. I forced myself to think logically. Heat exhaustion could cause hallucinations. So could dehydration or altitude sickness. But I was only at 3,000 feet. I'd had plenty of water and the temperature was actually too cold. Mark, we need to move, now. I helped him to his feet, shocked at how light he'd become. He felt hollow, like all the substance had been drained out of him. That's when I heard the laughter. It came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the mountains like it was bouncing between worlds. Low, amused laughter that made my teeth ache. And underneath it, more whispers in Cherokee. This time I understood some of the words. Time to feed, time to grow, time to take what was promised. Mark collapsed against me. He's coming, he whispered. The Shadow Walker is coming. I half-carried Mark down the trail, both of us stumbling in the thick fog. My shadow kept moving wrong, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, sometimes not there at all. Every few minutes I'd catch glimpses of other shadows moving between the trees, shadows that belonged to no one. We made it maybe half a mile before we met Alice Stormwind coming up the trail. Alice was a fellow ranger, 5 years on the job, and one of the toughest people I knew. She was also the closest thing to family I had left since my divorce. Seeing her solid, reliable face through the fog felt like salvation. John, thank God, dispatch lost contact with you 3 hours ago. She looked at Mark and her expression changed. Jesus, what happened to him? I don't know. Found him like this. We need to get him to the hospital right now. Alice studied Mark's aged face, then looked around at the unnatural fog. Something's not right here. It's October, but it feels like January. And why is it so quiet? Alice, we need to go. Now. Something's wrong on this mountain. But she was already kneeling beside Mark, checking his pulse. His heartbeat's all wrong, too slow, and he's cold as ice. She looked up at me. John, this doesn't look like any medical condition I've ever seen. That's when Mark grabbed her arm. Don't look in the water, he whispered urgently. He's in all the reflections now. Don't look in the water. There was a small creek running beside the trail, clear mountain water flowing over smooth stones. Alice glanced at it automatically, then froze. John, she said very quietly, look at the water. I looked. The creek reflected the gray sky and overhanging trees, just like it should. But it also reflected Alice, and something standing right behind her. A tall, dark figure in the reflection, maybe 7 feet tall, wearing what looked like old Cherokee ceremonial dress. But his face was shadow, absolute darkness where features should be, and he was reaching out toward Alice's reflection with hands that ended in 2 long fingers. Alice, move away from the water. But she couldn't. She was staring into the creek like she was hypnotized. He's beautiful, she said dreamily. He's showing me things, old things, sacred things. In the reflection, the shadow figure's hands touched Alice's reflection's shoulders, and Alice began to change. Her brown hair started turning gray at the roots. Lines appeared around her eyes. Her strong shoulders began to sag. Alice! I grabbed her arm and yanked her away from the creek. She blinked, confused. What? John, what's happening to me? She looked at her hands. They were wrinkled now, spotted with age. Why do I look so old? The laughter came again, louder this time. And a voice, speaking perfect English with an accent older than the mountains. She looked willingly, Ranger. She saw the sacred visions. Now she feeds me willingly, too. Alice's reflection was still visible in the creek, even though she'd moved away from the water, and her reflection was walking deeper into the reflected forest, following the shadow figure. No, Alice said, but her voice sounded distant. I have to go with him. He's teaching me the old ways. She started walking toward the edge of the trail, where the mountain dropped away into a 100-foot gorge. I tackled her. We went down hard on the rocky trail, and she fought like a wildcat. But she was aging fast. Her muscles were getting weaker even as she struggled. "Let me go," she screamed. "He's beautiful. He's showing me the sacred places." I held her down and looked back at the creek. Her reflection was gone now, but the shadow figure remained. And slowly, terribly, it turned to look directly at me. "Jonathan Whitehorse," it said, and its voice was like wind through autumn leaves. "Grandson of Mary Whitehorse, who knew the old ceremonies. You carry the blood. You can see the sacred places. What do you want?" "What I have always wanted. What was promised to me 300 years ago when I completed the blood rituals. Life eternal. And you. You will feed me for a very long time." Alice had stopped struggling. I looked down at her face. She looked 60 now, maybe older. "John," she whispered, "I can't fight him. He's in my shadow now. He's making me." She stood up with movements that weren't her own, like a puppet on strings, and she started walking toward the gorge again. "Alice, no!" But she couldn't hear me anymore. Her eyes were empty, reflecting only shadows. She reached the edge of the trail and kept walking. I watched my friend, my partner, the closest thing to family I had left, walk off the side of Blood Mountain. I heard her body hit the rocks below, but I couldn't move to look. Because the shadow figure was stepping out of the creek now, becoming three-dimensional. "Your friend chose to look," it said, "but you I will take slowly. You have Cherokee blood. You can sustain me for decades." I looked down and saw that my shadows, who had completely detached from my body, it stood beside me like a dark twin, copying the shadow figure's movements instead of mine. Mark was laughing now, but it wasn't his laugh. It was the thing's laugh coming out of Mark's aged throat. "He's been in your shadow since you found the footprints, growing stronger, learning about you. Soon he'll be you." The fog began to lift, and I could see Blood Mountain's summit clearly for the first time. The rocky peak was covered with shadows. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All the people who'd disappeared on this mountain over the years, all feeding the Shadow Walker, making him stronger. And now, I was going to join them. The Shadow Walker stepped fully into our world, and I could see what 3 centuries of stolen life had made him. He wore the regalia of a Cherokee shaman, beaded vest, feathered headdress, ceremonial paint. But everything was wrong, corrupted. The beads were black as midnight. The feathers looked like they came from no bird that ever lived, and the paint on his face moved like it was alive. "You recognize the ceremonial dress," he said. "Good. Your grandmother taught you some of the old ways." "My grandmother never taught me anything like this." "No, she knew better. But she did teach you the protection ceremonies, didn't she? The ones to keep evil spirits away?" He laughed. "Too bad you never believed in them." Mark stood up, moving like an old man, but with the thing's voice. "Tell him, Walker. Tell him what you really are." The Shadow Walker moved closer. Up close, I could see that his face wasn't just dark. It was empty, like looking into a hole in the world. "I was a shaman once, a real one, serving my people, keeping the sacred places safe. But I wanted more. I wanted to live forever, to see all the centuries pass, to know all the secrets." He gestured to the shadows on the peak. "So I learned the blind, oud magic, the forbidden ceremonies. I killed 7 of my own people and took their life force into myself. The Cherokee would have exiled you, killed you. They tried, but I had already transformed. I became something new, something that could live in shadows, feed on life itself, grow stronger with each victim." He stepped closer. "For 300 years I have fed on those who come to my mountain, hikers, rangers, anyone foolish enough to climb alone. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The trail behind me was blocked by shadows, and ahead was only the drop where Alice had fallen. But you're special, Jonathan Whitehorse. You have the blood. Cherokee shamans can sustain me for decades instead of days, and you—" He reached out with one impossible hand. "You will make me strong enough to leave this mountain, to hunt in the cities below." My detached shadow stepped forward and grabbed my arms, holding me still. I couldn't fight my own shadow. Every move I made, it countered perfectly. "Don't fight," the Shadow Walker said. "It will only make the feeding more painful." He placed one cold hand on my forehead. Immediately I felt years of my life draining away. My hair started turning gray, my joints began to ache, my vision blurred. But with the aging came something else, memories that weren't mine. I saw the Shadow Walker's true history. I saw him 300 years ago, young and proud, serving his people as a healer and guide. I saw his growing obsession with death, his fear of growing old, his descent into the forbidden blood magic. I saw him murdering 7 innocent people in a ritual circle on Blood Mountain's peak. And I saw what the ritual had cost him. Yes, he'd gained immortality, but he'd lost his humanity, his connection to the living world. He was trapped on this mountain, sustained only by feeding on others, growing more twisted and hungry with each passing century. But there was something else in the memories, something important. "You're not immortal," I gasped as he drained another year from me. "You're cursed. The magic is eating you from the inside. That's why you need to feed constantly." His grip tightened. "Silence. You're dying. Have been for 300 years. Each person you drain just delays the inevitable." I could feel my strength failing, but I forced myself to keep talking. "The Cherokee spirits cursed you. The 7 people you murdered. They're still fighting you from the spirit world." I said silence, but I could see the truth in his empty face. The Shadow Walker wasn't a triumphant immortal. He was a man slowly being consumed by his own evil, feeding on others just to postpone his spiritual death. And suddenly I remembered something my grandmother had taught me. Not protection ceremonies. She'd tried to teach me those, but I'd never paid attention. No, this was something simpler, something she'd whispered to me during thunderstorms when I was scared as a child. A prayer, in Cherokee. I began to speak the words, barely remembering them. A prayer for the spirits of the dead to find peace. A prayer for evil to be cast out. A prayer my grandmother had learned from her grandmother, passed down through generations of Cherokee women. The Shadow Walker screamed, "You cannot!" His grip on my life force faltered. "You don't know the sacred words." But I did know them. Not well, but enough. And as I spoke, the shadows on the mountain peak began to move. Not toward us. Away. The stolen shadows of all his victims were breaking free. "No. They feed me. They sustain me." One by one, the shadows on the peak rose into the air and dissolved into light. And with each one that escaped, the Shadow Walker grew weaker. His form became less solid, more like smoke. "This isn't possible," he snarled. "I performed the blood rituals correctly. I bound their spirits to me forever." "You bound their shadows," I said, understanding finally flowing through me. "But you never bound their souls. And souls can choose forgiveness." My own shadow snapped back to me like a rubber band. Suddenly I was in control of my body again. Though I felt ancient and exhausted, the Shadow Walker was fading, becoming translucent. 7 people, I continued, the Cherokee words flowing more easily now. 7 innocent people you murdered, but their spirits forgive you. They choose to let you go. "I don't want their forgiveness," he raged. "I want their life." But it was too late. The last shadow on the peak, a small one, maybe a child, floated free and dissolved into golden light. And without the stolen life force to sustain him, the Shadow Walker began to crumble. "This isn't over," he whispered, as his form scattered like leaves in the wind. "I will find another way. I will feed again." But even as he spoke, I could see he was wrong. 300 years of borrowed time were catching up with him all at once. His essence was fragmenting, becoming nothing more than ordinary shadow and darkness. Within minutes, there was nothing left but silence and the natural sounds of the mountain returning. Birds singing, wind in the trees, the distant sound of running water. Mark collapsed beside the trail, but he was breathing normally now. Still aged, still damaged, but alive. And when I looked at the creek, I saw only clear water reflecting the sky. The shadow walker of Blood Mountain was finally, truly dead. It took 2 days to get rescue teams up to retrieve Alice's body and get Mark to a hospital. The official report said he'd suffered severe exposure and dehydration, which explained his condition well enough for the paperwork. Nobody asked too many questions about why a 23-year-old man looked 60. Alice's death was ruled accidental, a tragic fall in heavy fog. I didn't try to explain what really happened. Who would believe it? Mark recovered somewhat over the following weeks. The doctors were amazed. His aging actually reversed a little as time passed. His hair turned brown again, some of the wrinkles faded, but he never got back all the years the shadow walker had stolen. He looked 40 now, would probably always look 40. Small price for his life, he said. Me, I wasn't so lucky. See, when you fight something like the shadow walker, when you touch the spirit world and speak the old prayers, there are consequences, prices to be paid. I kept my job, kept working the mountains I loved, but something had changed. I'd aged 20 years in those few minutes on Blood Mountain, and unlike Mark, the years didn't come back. My hair stayed gray, the lines stayed on my face. Doctors couldn't explain it, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was my shadow. It came back to me when the shadow walker died, snapped back into place like nothing had happened. But it was different now. Damaged. Sometimes on bright sunny days I cast no shadow at all. Other times my shadow moves just a half second behind me, like it's struggling to keep up. And sometimes, only sometimes, I catch it moving on its own. Just small movements. A finger pointing at something I'm not looking at. A slight turn of the head towards sounds I can't hear. The Cherokee medicine man, Samuel Crowfeather, came to see me a month after the incident. He looked at my shadow and nodded grimly. Part of your spirit is still connected to the dark places, he told me. When you fought the shadow walker, when you spoke the sacred words, you opened yourself to the spirit world. That connection can never be fully closed. Am I dangerous? I asked. He considered this carefully. Not to others, but the darkness recognizes you now. It knows you can see it. Fight it. Other evil spirits will be drawn to you. You'll encounter things most people never see. And my shadow? Part of it was consumed in the battle. What came back is less than it was, but also more. It sees things now that you cannot. It remembers the touch of the spirit world. I asked him what I should do. Keep doing what you're doing, he said. Protect these mountains. Help people who get lost. But know that some of the people you'll help will be running from more than bears or weather. He was right. In the 2 years since Blood Mountain, I've encountered 3 other supernatural situations. A woman being stalked by the ghost of her murdered husband. Hikers who got lost in a valley that doesn't exist on any map. A family whose campsite was invaded by something that looked like their dead daughter. Each time, my damaged shadow moved before I did, warning me of danger I couldn't see. Each time, I was able to help because I'd learned to trust what my grandmother had tried to teach me. That there are old powers in these mountains, and sometimes the only way to fight darkness is with the older light. I still patrol Blood Mountain regularly. The trail is safe now. Hikers report feeling peaceful there, like the mountain is watching over them instead of hunting them. But I make sure to check on it, to watch for any signs that something new is stirring in the shadows. Because Samuel Crowfeather taught me something else. Evil, like the shadow walker, doesn't just disappear. It spreads, like seeds on the wind. The walker is gone, but his influence might have touched other places, other people. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my cabin, I look in the mirror and practice the Cherokee prayers my grandmother tried to teach me. I'm getting better at them. I have to, because my reflection shows me things that aren't there, shadows that move when nothing casts them. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see a flicker of something familiar in those shadows. Something that looks like it might be laughing. The shadow walker is dead. I made sure of that. But shadows have a way of lingering in the darkest corners, waiting for the right moment to grow strong again. And I'll be waiting too. My name is Jonathan Whitehorse, badge number 3394. I'm a ranger in the Chattahoochee National Forest, and I believe in the old stories now. Sometimes believe. F is the only thing standing between the darkness and the people I've sworn to protect. Sometimes it has to be enough.